Our story begins with a man whose father was a celebrated hero and whose daughter, Ryan, is a rising star in the police force. He, however, is known as the leader of the world's largest drug cartel, a monster who supposedly killed his own wife and son. And today, his own daughter, Lin Ruyan, has personally arrested him and brought him before the court to face judgment. They place him inside the memory judgment machine to be interrogated by his own past, and surprisingly, he doesn't refuse. Even though the process is agonizing, he knows this is his only chance to finally prove his innocence. But we should note that this machine is still in its experimental stages, especially when used on a high-level criminal. The prisoner will endure a pain worse than death, and once the process begins, there is no way to stop it. Yet, facing a supposed demon like him, the court shows no mercy, and the judge gives the final order to proceed. Several people in white coats and gloves step forward, forcing him down onto the cold surface of the examination bed. They begin connecting various instruments to his brain, while the jury benches fill with spectators eager for justice. Among them, an old man in his late 70s with white hair begins to weep uncontrollably, his voice filled with grief. He calls him a beast, crying out that Yu Chu was his wife and Shaokai was his own flesh and blood. He asks how he could have been so cruel, and hearing that voice, Lin Hui looks up with a trembling body. His bloodshot eyes are filled with exhaustion as he whispers a single word, "Father," so quietly that only he can hear it. This is his father-in-law, the man who stood by him back when he was still poor and had absolutely nothing to his name. It was this old man who placed Yochu's hand in his, telling him that he believed Lin Hui was a good man. His daughter loved him and was willing to take a gamble on their future, but it seems he made the old man lose everything. From the jury seats, voices cry out that Lin Hui has disappointed them all, their words heavy with resentment. Several middle-aged men in uniform look on with eyes full of disdain. He glances at them briefly before lowering his head again. They were once classmates, and to be honest, he had always been the most brilliant and promising among them. He should have had a future far more brilliant than any of theirs, but instead, he chose a path of no return. The technician announces that the memory judgment machine is ready, and with a sharp wave of his hand, the judge orders them to begin. A massive screen slowly descends before the crowd as the crackle of an electric current fills the silent courtroom. Inside the machine, Lin Hui feels as though 1,000 needles are piercing his brain, yet he remains perfectly still. He is bound so tightly that he cannot move even a fraction of an inch, while several cameras pivot toward the screen. We should note that this trial is being broadcast live across the entire nation, leaving no room for secrets. As the machine activates, his deepest memories are extracted to be displayed for all to see, which is exactly what they want. They are eager to witness for themselves just how monstrous and evil this demon walking among men truly is. The screen flickers with static for a brief moment before a clear scene finally begins to take shape. Imagine a desolate, wild mountain range where small mounds of earth rise like silent sentinels from the ground. The camera focuses on one particular mound, a fresh grave that looks as though it was dug only recently. A young boy, barely 7 or 8 years old, kneels there all alone, his tears flowing in an endless, silent stream. Not far away, several police officers watch with bloodshot eyes, cursing the ruthless drug traffickers who caused this tragedy. Old Lin was only a few days away from retirement, just a few days, and they wonder how such a thing could happen now. They pity young Lin Hui, who at such a tender age has lost his only remaining relative and his father's legacy. Aside from those standing there, no one saw the work he did. No one but the earth itself felt the blood he shed. He was a man who could never stand in the sunlight, and even in death, he is buried in this deserted wasteland. These voices carry clearly through the courtroom speakers, bringing the weight of that distant grief into the present. As the spectators watch the scene unfold, a heavy sigh ripples through the room. It is, to be honest, a truly pathetic sight. After all, the father was a celebrated hero and the daughter is a champion of justice, making this fall from grace even more bitter. Now, 2 rising stars have emerged in the spotlight, both of them remarkably talented and successful. And yet, he became the ultimate disgrace, at least in the eyes of his daughter, Lin Ruyan. As she watches the small, pitiful figure on the screen, she is reminded of her own past, kneeling before the graves of her mother and brother. The helplessness and despair are strikingly similar, but she feels no sympathy. Deep down, there is only a growing resentment. Meanwhile, the machine continues its transparent judgment, and as the memories are extracted, Lin Hui feels an agonizing pain. He struggles frantically, his expression twisting into a mask of agony as he endures the process. But not a single person in the room feels pity. They simply watch this demon walking among men receive his punishment. To them, it is pure justice. The scene shifts, and we see him growing up through elementary, middle, and high school. His grades were consistently excellent, and his father's old colleagues treated him as if he were their own flesh and blood. But as the years passed, the familiar faces of those uncles who came to visit every year began to dwindle. In their place, the mounds of earth near his father's grave grew in number, until finally, the cycle reached its end. We return to that same wilderness, though much has changed in the decade and a half that has slipped by. The desolate land has been transformed into a martyr's cemetery, and right there, next to his father's resting place, stands a long row of headstones, an entire squad of narcotics officers who gave their lives over those 15 years. Lin Hui kneels before each one, bowing his head in respect until he reaches the very last grave in the line. Then, he stands up with firm resolve and walks away without a single backward glance. Only his fragmented words linger in the wind. When you were alive, you chose to stand in the darkness. You burned yourselves to light the way for others. I honestly don't know what gave you the strength to keep going, but I want to be just like you. From that day on, he studied with a renewed, almost desperate intensity. By the second half of his senior year, the two most prestigious universities in Daxia had both offered him a place. All of his classmates, his homeroom teacher, and honestly, every single person in that small county town was watching him. They were all so incredibly proud of him. In such a remote and backward little place, producing a top-tier student was a rare feat. It was a monumental achievement, yet to everyone's absolute shock, Lin Hui refused the offers. Yes, he turned them down. He rejected the olive branches from the two most prestigious universities. As we watch the scene unfold on the screen, the audience in the courtroom can't help but shake their heads and sigh, thinking of what a terrible waste it all was. They believe he simply didn't know how to cherish the opportunity. Had he gone to those schools, things might have been different. Perhaps he wouldn't have ended up in this state. His daughter, Lin Ruyan, clenches her fists, thinking of his desire to be like those heroes. To her, it's a tragedy that he eventually became their greatest disgrace. The more successful he was as a boy, the more she resents him now. Among the jury, a gray-haired old man bows his head in deep, visible sorrow. This was Lin Hui's former teacher. He laments through his tears that of all his students, Lin Hui had been the most brilliant and promising of them all. He wonders how such a boy could become such a man, even blaming himself for nurturing what he now calls a monster. This old man had been his mentor, and because of Lin Hui's unique circumstances, he had always looked out for him with extra care. Throughout his school years, the teacher provided him with endless support, never imagining the path his pupil would eventually take. He had no idea, of course, that the boy would become a demon loathed by everyone. Suddenly, the screen shifts to a new memory. We see the young man standing before the gates of a university. He looks up at the sign hanging above the entrance. And as he reads the words Daxia First Police University, a brilliant, hopeful light finally flickers in his eyes. He whispers to his parents, wondering if this was the place where they once walked. He tells them that he has finally arrived. With a firm stride, he walks through the academy gates, clutching his admission notice tightly in his hand. Back in the present, inside the memory extractor, Lin Hui is in absolute agony as large tears roll down his face. His consciousness struggles frantically against the machine. Deep down, he is exhausted and only wants to see his parents again. The major drug dealer who killed his parents has finally been slain, and the largest drug trafficking syndicate in Southeast Asia has finally been dismantled. In this moment, it is as if we have traveled back several decades in time. Seeing him kneeling before his father's grave, watching this unfold on the screen, the audience is left utterly stunned. He actually walked away from the prestigious offers of the top two universities, choosing instead to enroll in the police academy. One victim's family member, eyes rimmed with red, speaks with a voice full of bitter resentment. He claims that Lin Hui learned everything the police academy had to teach, but those skills were never meant for good. He didn't use that knowledge to fight against evil. Instead, he used it to counter the heroic efforts of the police. He used his training to protect his own path as a demon. His daughter, Lin Ruyan, watches him step into the first police academy and is suddenly overcome by a wave of pure disgust. She is also a graduate of the first police academy, and the thought that she and this piece of human trash once studied at the very same school, even if he is her father, is almost too much for her to bear. To her, it is a monumental insult. 3 generations of their family graduated from that same university. But while her grandfather became a hero in the fight against drugs, and she herself is currently working to dismantle criminal forces, her only purpose in life now is to personally capture this monster. She wants him to face the judgment of justice, to give her mother, her brother, and the countless innocent people he harmed the closure they deserve. Meanwhile, the pain of the memory extraction is only intensifying. It is reaching a level that far exceeds the limits of what any human being should be able to endure. Yet, as we watch him struggle in absolute agony, not a single person in the room feels a shred of pity. They believe a demon like him deserves every bit of suffering. Under everyone's watchful eyes, we follow him into the university, where they see the specific major this scoundrel chose, the Department of Narcotics Control. To the crowd watching, this feels like a direct insult to the very profession of narcotics control, and they can't help but voice their fury. As the images on the large screen continue to shift, we see that after entering the police academy, Lin Hui studied with an almost obsessive intensity. He mastered the textbooks on drug enforcement perfectly, excelling in nearly every single course he took. He consistently ranked first, and not just in theory, but in the practical investigation of drug-related crimes as well. Whether it was investigative techniques, physical training, or tactical skill design, he pushed himself to the limit. He trained as if his very life depended on it, taking the top spot time and again until, finally, for years had passed. Now, it is time for this elite group of narcotics control students to graduate, and we see them dressed in their academic gowns. They run to the roof of the tallest building at the Dasha Police Academy and sit side by side, looking out over the horizon. As they discuss their futures after graduation, one asks if they are afraid. The answer is a resounding no. If they were afraid, they wouldn't have chosen this major. In their department, there isn't a single coward among them. From this point on, their lives will be spent facing violent drug traffickers, essentially walking on the edge of a knife for a living. Eventually, everyone turns their gaze toward one person. They ask Lin Hui what he plans to do after graduation, but he says nothing, merely looking up at the distant setting sun. He knows that once this beautiful sunset slips behind the mountains, the true darkness will finally arrive. After everyone else has left, he quietly stands up and makes his way toward a specific office. Inside, an elderly man suddenly stands up, his face a mask of pure disbelief. What? You want to be a gray man? Lin Hui confirms that yes, he wants to be an undercover operative, his eyes showing a level of resolve we haven't seen before. After a long silence, the old man lets out a heavy sigh and asks him why he would choose such a dangerous path. Instead of answering with words, he silently pulls out a martyr's medal. His parents, it seems, were both involved in the fight. Some were narcotics officers, others were gray men, undercover souls who spent their lives burning themselves out in the darkness. They lit the path for Daxia, and now that they have sacrificed everything and I have grown up, it is my turn to answer the call. The old man's entire body begins to tremble, his eyes filling with tears as he listens to the young man's resolve. It takes a long moment for him to regain control of his emotions before he finally looks up at Lin Hui. With a face full of pride and admiration, he notes that Lin Hui's father was also one of his most exceptional students, a gray man. He warns him that if he chooses this, no one will ever know what he does. His files and his very identity will be sealed away. It will be as if he has vanished from the face of the earth, leaving him to endure a life of endless, crushing loneliness. He will face countless brutal enemies, yet Lin Hui's answer remains the same. He is more than willing to do it. He knows perfectly well that the road ahead offers only a slim chance of survival, but he chooses it without a second thought. After all, some things in this life are simply more precious than living, and some convictions must be strong enough to conquer fear. As we watch him choose the life of a gray man, a heavy, uneasy silence settles over everyone in the crowd. His daughter, Lin Ruyan, stares at the screen, her body trembling uncontrollably as she realizes the truth she never could have imagined. She never knew he had chosen to become a gray man, and now her tears break forth like a sudden, unstoppable flood. Even if he started as an undercover operative, she wonders why he eventually turned and murdered his own wife and child. They were his own flesh and blood, and she cannot fathom why he would also choose to kill his own colleagues. Those men were his brothers in arms, the very people who shed blood alongside him in the line of duty. She asks herself if the title of Gray Man is really enough to cover up the horrific crimes he committed later. Or perhaps, as she fears, he simply couldn't resist the pull of the darkness and eventually became its most loyal slave. On the screen, the images continue to play, showing Lin Hui as he submits his various application materials for review. Because of his father's legacy as a gray man and a martyr, he is successfully accepted into the secretive ranks. And so, he enters a new stage of specialized training, where we see him surrounded by a group of like-minded comrades. We see that Lin Hui has earned the top score in every single category of the gray man training, prompting his instructor, Ding Hui, to ask a question. He wants to know why the young man pushes himself so desperately, and Lin Hui calmly replies that once he becomes a gray man, he simply wants his eventual death to have some actual value. Meanwhile, in the present, a distinguished old man stands before the screen. As he watches the footage, tears stream down his face, his expression twisted in a painful, internal conflict. He remembers Lin Hui as his most brilliant student, a man he once believed would be the light that finally drove back the darkness. But he cannot understand why Lin Hui failed to stay true to his path, eventually becoming the very shadow that smothered that light. A few people nearby tell the old man that a monster like Lin Hui isn't worth his grief. Standing beside the elder, several middle-aged men quickly gather around. They were all part of the same gray man class as Lin Hui. However, out of dozens of recruits, only these few survived, and in their eyes, the primary culprit behind all that loss is the man they are watching on the screen. The memory continues to play, jumping forward 2 years to graduation day. Out on the training grounds, Ding Hui looks over the dozen or so young men remaining and reminds them that today is the day they officially finish their journey. From this moment on, he is no longer their instructor, and they are no longer his students. The bond is officially severed. He goes even further, telling them that starting today, their parents, wives, and children are no longer their family. In the eyes of the world, they are now dead. As Ding Hui looks at the group, the recruits begin to take their solemn oath. Lin Ruyan's tears are now unstoppable as she watches her father on the screen. Every word of the oath he recites feels like a heavy sledgehammer striking her heart, leaving her screaming internally in a state of pure agony. She wonders how someone who once held such noble ideals could eventually choose to betray every single promise he made. She asks herself if this was truly the reason he could heartlessly murder over a dozen of his fellow gray men. The footage moves on. To infiltrate the target organization, we see Lin Hui begin to frequent various places of ill repute, drowning himself in a world of neon and vice. He becomes a fixture in this seedy underworld, surrounded by a crowd of questionable friends and the constant, hollow company of the nightlife. We see Lin Hui cornered on a street by a gang of thugs, enduring a brutal barrage of kicks and punches. In that moment, he was just a naive young man entering society, and the assault left him with 3 broken ribs. A blade slashed his left cheek, leaving a jagged, terrifying scar. 3 years pass, and he is now 23. By now, he has perfectly inhabited this role, radiating nothing but the rough, dangerous energy of a street hoodlum. As a regular fixture in the local gambling dens, he eventually finds himself buried under a mountain of debt. He is forced to hide and wander the streets like a ghost until, inevitably, the day of reckoning arrives. His creditors finally track him down beneath a bridge. When he cannot pay, their frustration turns into violent rage. 1 stab, then 2, then 3, yet he never utters a single sound. Meanwhile, hidden in the nearby shadows, an evaluator watches the scene, covering their mouth tightly to ensure not a single gasp escapes into the night. Tears fall from their eyes, yet they choose not to intervene, for a gray man must learn to survive alone. Just as he begins to lose consciousness, a mysterious figure approaches him there beneath the bridge. The man tells him that if he follows, he can finally live like a real human being. 3 months later, we see Lin Hui reappear half a year later at the foot of the notorious Jinshan Mountains. He has successfully infiltrated the ranks of the Kunsa Group, a powerful and deadly local drug cartel. The man who saved him was actually a high-ranking leader within the syndicate. As the audience watches the screen, some people can no longer contain their agitation, shouting that this was the exact place where it all began. This was the demon's first step into the abyss. Working under a minor boss in the Kunsa Group, he began participating in a series of heinous crimes. Soon, due to his seemingly ruthless efficiency, he was promoted to a leadership position himself. Everything seemed to be proceeding exactly according to plan. However, on his very second day as a boss, Kunsa himself sent word that he wanted a meeting. Kunsa is a middle-aged man who looks quite refined and elegant, holding a gentleman's cane as he slowly raises his head. As Kunsa's voice rings out, Lin Hui slowly looks up to meet his gaze. We see a mask of absolute calm on Kunsa's face just as a maid approaches, carrying a fresh cup of coffee. She offers the boss his drink, and the gentle-looking Kunsa takes the cup to have a light, careful sip. His smile never wavers as he sets the cup down and looks at the servant, asking if he ever told her his preference. He only drinks his coffee at exactly 30 degrees, a statement that leaves the servant's face pale with terror. With a heavy thud, she drops to her knees before Kunsa, desperately begging for his forgiveness. She explains the air conditioning was a bit high today and begs for mercy, but he simply tells her to come closer. Kunsa maintains that pleasant smile right up until the moment the servant crawls within his reach. Suddenly, his expression twists into something truly ghoulish as he raises that elegant gentleman's cane high. He brings it down violently on the servant's head, leaving her screaming in agony on the floor. As she wails and clutches her bloodied head, Kunsa simply returns to his seat as if nothing happened. He regains his previous smile and begins to speak to himself, or perhaps to the room at large. He recites her profile: Wu Yin, 27 years old, a graduate of a certain police academy. After graduating, she became a gray man for the police, using 2 hidden lines within the Kunsa Group. She had successfully infiltrated the organization, or so she thought at the time. She had managed to position herself as the personal coffee servant in Kunsa's own kitchen. As Kunsa calmly recounts her history, Wu Yan's screams slowly fade into a heavy, terrified silence. Her face turns deathly pale, all hope vanishing from her eyes as she looks at Kunsa with bitter resentment. She demands to know how he found out, but Kunsa only shakes his head before turning his gaze toward Lin Hui. Kunsa asks if he is indeed Ling Hui, the one working under Old Wu, and Ling Hui simply confirms it with a mask of absolute calm. The boss notes his composure with approval, remarking that it is no wonder Old Wu thinks so highly of him, and promises he will be well rewarded. He explains that in their line of work, they are natural enemies with the police, yet those officers never stop trying to find a way in. They keep trying to shove undercover agents into his inner circle, and Kunsa turns to ask Ling Hui exactly how they should deal with this Wu Yan. After Ling Hui gives his cold answer, Kunsa decides to leave the matter entirely in his hands to see how he handles it. Kunsa seems quite satisfied as Ling Hui steps forward without a moment's hesitation and grabs Wu Yan by the hair. He begins to drag her toward the exit with brutal force, while Wu Yan lets out a series of agonizing screams. Suddenly, the calm in Ling Hui's eyes vanishes, replaced by a sudden, violent burst of energy. He delivers a direct kick to Wu Yan's mouth, a strike so powerful that her teeth are instantly shattered and knocked loose. Her mouth becomes a bloody mess, and the sheer pain causes her to lose consciousness as her screams finally fall silent. Watching this display of cruelty, Kunsa can't help but lick his lips, clearly enjoying the spectacle. A bloodthirsty glint appears in his eyes as he admits he likes this new recruit's spirit, while Ling Hui drags the woman to the back garden. He looks down at Wu Yan, who is now being treated like nothing more than a common pest to be discarded in the darkness. He tells her this is the price for opposing them and asks if she regrets it, all while lifting her up by the throat. He shifts his position, making sure his back is turned toward the villa and any prying eyes from within. In that moment, Wu Yan's eyes go wide as she notices Ling Hui's lips moving in a silent, trembling rhythm. Large droplets of blood and tears begin to fall from her eyes as she stares at the man standing before her. The ferocious expression he wore just moments ago has vanished, replaced by a face twisted in the most extreme agony imaginable. His own tears begin to fall in heavy drops, and though he makes no sound, his heart is clearly breaking. Wu Yan can clearly read his lips in the moonlight, seeing the words he is desperately mouthing. "Comrade, please forgive me." On the screen, we see Wu Yan's twisted hands clutching Ling Hui's arms as her lips move with agonizing effort. She tells him she has failed her country and its mission, leaving the rest of the burden in his hands. He understands her final wish perfectly. With a heavy heart, he bids her a silent farewell and tightens his grip. The sickening sound of breaking bone echoes through the air, and a moment later, Wu Yan's head slumps to the side. The life has left her. Ling Hui takes a shovel and strikes the earth of the back garden with a heavy thud. The blade hits something solid, and a skull rolls out of the dirt, causing his heart to tremble for a brief moment. With another scoop of dirt, he reveals a mass of white bones buried beneath the surface, a truly grim sight. He knows all too well that the vast majority of these remains belong to those lost over the last 20 years. They were the undercover agents and officers who simply vanished. From behind, he appears completely detached. He continues to dig, shovel after shovel, as if the bones and corpses in this pit mean nothing to him at all. To any observer from the villa, he is a machine, but we see the truth from the front. His face is a mask of the most extreme agony imaginable, even as he remains surrounded by total darkness. In this place, even the luxury of crying out loud is forbidden. Finally, he finishes digging a deep grave. He places Wu Yan inside and covers her with soil, promising that one day, someone will bring them all home. He vows they will return to their own land. A few seconds later, he suddenly whips his head around toward the shadows. He demands to know who is there, only to hear a laugh praising his ruthlessness and steady nerves in the face of death. The voice remarks that old Wu and the boss were right about him. Out of the darkness, a figure slowly emerges. It is a thin, frail-looking old man with a face full of gloom, yet his presence is undeniably predatory. Ling Hui watches him silently, knowing that the fallen soldiers in this pit likely met their end at this man's hands. Worse still, he knows they endured inhuman torture before they were finally allowed to find peace in the dirt. The old man tells him that he can leave now, as the boss has declared his test officially passed. He promises that from now on, Ling Hui can expect a rapid rise to power. A little later, we see him finally walk out. He moves beyond the reach of the villa's surveillance cameras. In that single, fleeting moment, he collapses onto the ground, looking up at the sky in a state of absolute, agonizing grief. Watching this from the courtroom, the audience can't help but feel a deep sense of pity for the man he was then. It is a sharp contrast to the man he would become, someone so widely loathed. His particular set of skills, however, earned him the absolute trust of the Kunsa group. Soon, the group's fifth leader, Lao Wu, brings him back to the city. From that point on, he becomes the number 2 leader for the Kunsa group in the city, overseeing endless shipments. Vast quantities of illicit goods flow through their channels. Because of the training he received back at the police academy, he uses his knowledge of narcotics tactics to lead Lao Wu and their crew away from police traps time and time again. He saves the syndicate tens of millions in losses, which, naturally, makes the Kunsa group value him even more. Aside from business, Kunsa and Lao Wu do not restrict his personal freedom. And then, we see a new figure suddenly enter his world. She was once known as the most beautiful girl in the small town, born into a prestigious family of musicians. It was a family of scholars and artists. Their first true meeting takes place during a concert. Perhaps it was fate, or just a strange coincidence, but her seat happens to be right next to his. The moment this woman appears on the screen, his daughter, Lin Ruyan, breaks down into uncontrollable sobs. She reaches out toward the screen, as if trying to touch the face of the woman shown there. And yes, this woman who suddenly entered his world is indeed her mother, Shin Yuchu. At this time, Shin Yuchu is in the prime of her youth and breathtakingly beautiful. However, for Lin Ruyan, the very last time she ever saw her mother, she watched as her father held a knife in his own hands. As the blade pierced her chest, we see him recall that first look at Shin Yuchu when his heart began to race. He had undergone the most rigorous training and knew exactly how to control his emotions. But when she suddenly crashed into his world, he had to admit his heartbeat was beyond his control. At that moment, Shin Yuchu was being harassed by a group of wealthy young men and felt utterly distressed. When she noticed him sitting nearby, her eyes lit up. She walked over and suddenly grabbed his arm, leaning close to his ear to whisper, "A plea for help. Sir, please help me get rid of them. Just pretend to be my boyfriend for a moment." She then looked up at her crowd of pursuers and told them she was sorry, but she already had a boyfriend. Hearing her words and seeing him sitting there motionless, the men were naturally quite skeptical. But then, their eyes widened in shock as Shun Yuchu leaned in and planted a kiss right on his cheek. Only then did they finally leave, looking dejected. It was a very long concert after that. When it ended, he got up and left quickly. Back at the drug den, he forced himself to drink a large glass of ice water. Only then did his racing heart finally begin to calm down. He tried his best to suppress those feelings deep down. He knew that from the moment he became a gray man, working undercover, he no longer had the right to speak of love. In the darkness, such emotions simply cannot survive. Yet fate, it seems, had other plans to bring them together again. This time it was night, and he was walking alone. Shin Yuchu came running toward him, her face a mask of panic as she cried out for help, saying someone was chasing her. She grabbed his arm once more, and the natural warmth and softness of her touch caused his face to flush red yet again. He looked at the group of thugs and raised his fists, warning them to stay far away from her. After that day, the entire county suddenly seemed very small. He and she kept crossing paths with such strange frequency. At the time, he didn't realize that these coincidences were actually the result of her own careful and deliberate planning. As time slowly passed, our feelings for one another grew until they were completely unstoppable. Finally, one day, encouraged by her friends, she found him while holding a bouquet of roses. But then, while everyone watched in stunned silence, he simply turned and walked away. He told himself she could never be happy with him. He left without looking back. We return to the present, where inside the memory judgment machine, 2 lines of tears begin to flow from the corners of his eyes. He had never once regretted becoming a gray man. His sacrifice had secured a happy life for so many others. The only person he truly felt sorry for was this girl whose eyes held only him. He had lost her twice, the first time being right then, and the second time, tragically, was when he personally drove that blade into her chest. On the screen, we see the following year, where he used the excuse of opening new channels for Kunsa to launch a bloody purge across the entire building, targeting countless vicious drug trafficking gangs. No one knew his true identity. They only knew him as the 6th ant of the Kunsa group. His nickname was Shura. It was during this year that his dark reputation began to spread throughout the building. The local police force deployed massive resources and manpower just to hunt him down. They labeled him a top-tier wanted criminal. The media's frantic reports painted him as a cold-blooded murderer who killed without blinking. Yet, very few people knew that those he killed were all members of dangerous drug cartels. To be honest, they were far from innocent. Every one of them had previously hunted local citizens or police officers. Throughout that entire year, Shin Yuchu never appeared again. But then, one day, when he finally returned home, he saw Shin Yuchu waiting at his door, and she was holding a child. It turned out that after their last meeting, Shin Yuchu had left the county. Originally, keeping to her promise, she had intended never to bother him again. But a month later, she discovered she was pregnant. To keep the secret from her father and her family, she traveled far away to a strange land alone. After 10 months of pregnancy, she gave birth to her first child. And that child was Lin Ruyan. As he looked at Shin Yuchu, his eyes instantly turned red with emotion. He told himself they should be together after all. This was the first time he had ever betrayed his own principles. In the days that followed, the mother and daughter stayed by his side. They were as happy as any other ordinary family. It felt, for a moment, like the life he was actually meant to live. But as happy as he and Shin Yuchu were then, the eventual ending would be just as tragic. And so, the days continued to pass by one. When Lin Ruyan was just over a year old, he found a red flyer stuck to his door one afternoon. He knew immediately that he had a new mission. That night, atop the city's tallest television tower, we see him standing with a middle-aged man. The man spoke slowly, breaking the heavy silence. He told him his performance over the past year had been excellent, and thanks to his intel, many dens had been destroyed. He watched the man silently, offering no reply. They had received word from a gray man on another line. It concerned another drug trafficking group, led by a man named Cha-Chai. Because within the borders of Daxia, most of the drug operations had been wiped out, this new group was moving in rapidly to fill the void. They wanted to seize the empty market, and apparently, they had a massive plan in motion. The undercover agent on that line had only managed to uncover this much before all news from him stopped. They suspected he had already sacrificed his life. As he finished, the middle-aged man's voice grew heavy with sorrow. He looked up sharply, his eyes turning bloodshot. He vaguely remembered the man who had infiltrated Cha-Chai's line. It was a fellow gray man from his own batch named Sun Jun had become the first of their group to fall. The man continued, explaining that they had another gray man embedded within the Cha-Chai group. However, his current status wasn't high enough to access more sensitive information for the time being. If the Cha-Chai group intended to execute their massive plan, there was a very high probability that they would seek a partnership with the Kunsa group. And this is where our protagonist comes in. They wanted him to use his status within Kunsa to contact Cha-Chai and investigate their fallen comrade. He nodded, his eyes bloodshot, promising himself he would uncover the truth behind Sun Jun's death. As he prepared to leave, he hesitated for a long moment before suddenly calling out to the man. The middle-aged man looked back in confusion, but he simply lowered his head, promising to complete the mission. The man looked at him with a flicker of guilt, acknowledging the heavy burden he had been carrying. He told him not to feel too much pressure and to ensure his own safety above all else. This specific intelligence line had been built on the lives of far too many fallen comrades already. It could not be lost. He nodded solemnly, watching as the middle-aged man finally disappeared into the night. Once alone, he suddenly slapped his own face, furious that he had even considered walking away. He called himself a coward, knowing that if he retreated now, his parents' sacrifices would be for nothing. Upon returning, he began using his identity as sixth master of the Kunsa group to contact Chachai. It turned out his contact was right. The Chachai group did indeed have a massive plan in motion. They intended to join forces with Kunsa to eliminate every other rival group within Daxia's borders. Their goal was to monopolize the entire market. He and the man known as Old Five, acting as the top two leaders for Kunsa within Daxia, successfully became the primary liaisons. And so, we see them beginning the very first step of this dangerous new cooperation. The first step was to continue purging every drug trafficking group within Daxia, forcing them to surrender their market shares. Every time he personally took action, a major trafficking den was inevitably leveled to the ground. One by one, these ruthless criminals fell by his hand over the course of more than a year, across dozens of provinces in Daxia, except for a few massive syndicates. Every other trafficking nest was wiped out by the combined forces of the Kunsa and Chachai groups. Naturally, he became their greatest hero. Come, sixth master. Let us raise a glass to the success of our first step. I drink to you, our most valuable player. A middle-aged man with a thick Thai accent raised a glass of red wine toward him. He gave the man a cold, dismissive glance and didn't move, simply continuing to drink his own wine in silence. Through his recent investigations, he had confirmed that the gray men on the Chachai line had indeed met with disaster. 3 undercover agents, including Sun Jun, had been exposed and died horrific deaths. If it weren't for the need to maintain the bigger picture, he would have loved to kill this man right here. The middle-aged man stood there awkwardly, a flash of pure malice crossing his eyes for a brief moment. As Haihu, the second-in-command for Chachai and Daxia, his status was certainly no lower than that of the sixth master. How dare you? What kind of attitude is that? Are you looking down on Lord Ho? Seeing Haihu lose face, several of his subordinates jumped forward, pointing their fingers aggressively at him. Their faces were full of arrogance and defiance. He said nothing, but the 4 men by his side slowly stood up, their eyes filled with a murderous, predatory glint. One of them spoke in a cold, piercing voice. If you have no further use for that hand, then by all means, keep pointing it at the sixth master. The threat hung heavy in the air, for chillingly cold auras slowly began to fill the room. Over the past 2 years, while the sixth master's reputation as Asura grew, the 4 evil ghosts rising under him became equally feared. They were his most ruthless tools, the coldest hearts and the bloodiest hands. They were fiercely loyal, willing to trade their lives for his. Seeing them defend him so fiercely, Fifth Master's expression became a complex mix of envy and reflection. He was the one who brought him into Kunsa. Yet now, they stood as equals. Sensing the tension was reaching a breaking point, Fifth Master forced a laugh and stepped between the 2 men. We are all family here. He insisted there was no need for such stiffness, especially since their first step had been a triumph. Fifth Master raised a toast to Haihu and the Sixth Master, who offered only a perfunctory gesture in return. 2 hours later, Haihu and his men departed, leaving only Fifth Master, the Sixth Master, and a few associates. Old Sixth, what was that today? Fifth Master asked. Haihu may only be the number 2 leader in Daxia, but his reputation for being as petty and vengeful as a leopard is well known. We don't fear him, but inviting such trouble for no reason simply isn't worth it. The Sixth Master didn't even look up. He only let out a cold, sharp reply. Fifth brother, we are the ones who did all the hard work. We wiped out the other cartels. Why should the Chachai group get a share of the spoils for doing nothing? And have you really not noticed the shady games Haihu and his people are playing behind our backs? We see Fifth Master's face grow solemn at these words. After a long silence, he finally looked up. Don't worry about that for now, he said. The big boss surely has his own plans for them. Just tell the brothers to stay alert and not get stabbed in the back. Once the dust settles, we will settle the score. He nodded, knowing a few words wouldn't make Kunsa turn on their allies just yet. His true goal was simple, to plant a seed of doubt, a thorn regarding Chachai, deep within Fifth Master's heart. That night, we see him holding the baby in his right arm, while Shun Yuchu rested in his left. Several times, Yuchu looked up as if to speak, before finally appearing to find her resolve. She asked if he could stop doing those things, if they could just leave and go far away together. She dreamed of a place where no one knew them, where they could live a quiet, stable life as a family. He remained silent in the darkness. Soon after, the alliance between Kunsa and Chachai began to move. Their influence in Daxiao expanded rapidly. With the situation stabilized, the 2 groups finally decided to strike. The first shipment of narcotics destined for Daxiao was massive, totaling nearly 100 tons. If 100 tons were to flow into Daxiao, the resulting devastation would be truly horrific. After much deliberation, he chose to send the intel out. Once the report was received, The top officials at the Daxia Anti-Drug Bureau were shocked, questioning if such news could possibly be true. They were assured it was. The intel came from one of their gray men who had risked his life to provide it. The head of the Daxia Anti-Drug Bureau nodded, realizing the gravity of the situation. They quickly began making secret arrangements, waiting for the moment the shipment crossed into Daxia. The plan was to seize everything in one fell swoop. This time, Bureau Chief Lin Cheng took charge. Lin Cheng acted as commander-in-chief, while his former instructor, Ding Hui, served as the first captain. At the border between Wadian and Daxia, Ding Hui led nearly 100 anti-drug officers into position. Joined by over 100 elite armed police, they lay in ambush as swarms of insects bit them in the night. After a long wait, beams of light finally appeared. "They're here," Ding Hui whispered, his eyes brightening. Everyone immediately snapped to attention. They could finally see their targets clearly. In the distance, we see figures carrying heavy packs, their hands gripping flashlights, and something far more dangerous. They were also clutching rifles. Ding Hui signaled his team to stay calm and wait for them to draw closer. His goal was to ensure not a single person escaped. As the smugglers reached the 50-meter mark, Ding Hui's eyes sharpened. He gave the sudden, decisive order to move out immediately. He shouted that they were Daxia police and that the group was surrounded, ordering them to drop their weapons. The only response Ding Hui received was a hail of bullets. The moment the first shots rang out, the smugglers began to scatter in a panic, firing back wildly as they tried to flee into the dark. Ding Hui issued a stern command. Any dangerous individual still holding a weapon was to be neutralized on sight. 10 minutes later, the chaos subsided. Aside from a few who had dropped to their knees in surrender, the rest of the smugglers lay dead. Ding Hui felt a surge of grim satisfaction at the result. He led his team to secure the perimeter, ordering a full inspection and weighing of the seized cargo. He wanted to see exactly how much of this poison they had intercepted. His officers stepped forward to comply. But as they pulled back the covers on the small carts, their expressions shifted instantly. Something was very wrong. The cargo on these carts wasn't narcotics at all. Ding Hui's face paled as he realized the gravity of the situation. He wondered where the plan had failed, and then 3 sets of blinding headlights suddenly cut through the night. The glare engulfed Ding Hui and his men. Instinctively, they shielded their eyes, realizing too late they were in an ambush. Ding Hui let out a roar of warning the moment he was blinded, but the trap had already been sprung. Tongues of fire erupted from all directions as hidden gunmen opened fire on the anti-drug officers and armed police. They began to fall like wheat before a scythe. "Command, we've been ambushed," one officer screamed into the radio. The intel was a lie. With a sharp cry of pain, Ding Hui was struck by a bullet and collapsed to the ground. Back at the Daxia anti-drug headquarters, Lin Cheng and his team suddenly bolted upright, shouting Ding Hui's name. Lin Cheng called out 3 times in succession, but the radio returned only the sounds of gunfire and explosions. Something had gone wrong, terribly wrong. He immediately ordered all nearby police forces to rush to the border. Lin Cheng's face was a mask of pure anxiety, and a heavy, somber silence fell over everyone in the room. They knew, with a sinking certainty, that disaster had struck. A short while later, as they waited by the door, a burst of static suddenly crackled through the headset. Lin Cheng grabbed it instantly, calling for Ding Hui again. But the voice that answered was a complete stranger's, telling him to stop shouting because Ding Hui wasn't dead yet. The voice spat out insults about the police, promising not to let him die easily before asking if Lin Cheng was a high-ranking official. The stranger hoped they enjoyed the surprise they had been sent. Lin Cheng, keeping his voice steady, asked who he was. The man replied that he was exactly who Lin Cheng thought he was, adding that he looked forward to their next meeting. After that, the headset fell into a permanent, haunting silence. It wasn't until over an hour later that Lin Cheng's backup forces finally reached the scene. When the first photos were transmitted to the big screen, everyone's eyes widened in horror. Their faces turned pale, their hearts heavy with a sudden, crushing grief. On the screen, we see the anti-drug officers lying perfectly still upon the cold, unforgiving ground. Lin Cheng turned, his eyes bloodshot with rage, and looked directly at the head of the Gray Man Intelligence Unit, Ouyang Chun. He demanded an explanation, not just for himself, but for the 100 young lives that had been tragically cut short. The head of the Gray Men looked just as pale, his eyes filled with a hollow sense of disbelief. He stammered that it was impossible, insisting that their intelligence couldn't have been wrong. Not this wrong. A senior superintendent in the room couldn't hold back a roar, blaming the Gray Men's intelligence for the catastrophe. To be honest, his anger was personal. His own child was among those who had just gone out on that mission. Lin Cheng clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white, demanding to know exactly what Ouyang Chun meant by that. Ouyang Chun insisted that their Gray Men underwent the most rigorous training and that none of them would ever betray their country. But Lin Cheng wasn't buying it, asking how he could possibly explain an operation that was so clearly a setup. It was obvious to anyone with eyes that something was terribly wrong, yet there he was, still standing his ground. He seemed determined to keep making excuses for a potential traitor who might have very well betrayed their entire nation. We move now to a quiet living room where a family of 3 sat before the television. The moment it was switched on, A clear, somber voice filled the room, reporting that around 3 in the morning on July 21st, nearly 172 anti-drug officers had reached the border between Wadian and Daxia. They had engaged a group of vicious drug traffickers, but unfortunately, they had walked straight into a deadly trap. 172 officers and armed police had tragically lost their lives in the line of duty. Among them, Commander Ding Hui and 8 other comrades had completely vanished from the scene. It was suspected they had been abducted. Upon hearing this news, the man in the room suddenly bolted to his feet. His body began to tremble violently, and tears fell in heavy, uncontrollable drops, though he didn't utter a single word. He handed little Lin Rian over to Shin Yuchu, then turned and walked away without looking back. He couldn't understand it. How could this have happened? How could they have been caught in such a devastating ambush? A short while later, beneath a quiet overpass, he looked at his contact with a soul-crushing despair. The man gave him a look of deep complexity. The contact turned away, claiming he didn't know anything other than the rumors of a massive intelligence failure. But that single, complicated look was enough to snap the man's already frayed nerves, acting like a spark to a fuse. He grabbed the contact by the collar and roared, asking if even he suspected him of betraying his own country. He wasn't afraid of the darkness or even of giving his life, but he lived in terror of the day his own people would doubt him. He was terrified that not a single person believed in him anymore, and that the world would never know he was a gray man. The contact couldn't help but growl back, insisting that if he truly doubted him, he wouldn't have risked coming to meet him at all. He told the man to calm down, but the weight was too much. He slumped against the wall, covering his face as he wept. Watching his friend's utter agony, the contact's own eyes reddened as he repeated that he had never doubted him for a second. Lin Hui reminded him that over 100 people were dead, and many of them were more than just names on a report. They were his former classmates from the police academy, his brothers, and they deserved a proper explanation for what happened. It took a long time, but he finally managed to regain control of his emotions, swearing that he would uncover the absolute truth. He vowed that they wouldn't die in vain, though he knew that regardless of the cause, this mission was a catastrophic failure. Deep down, he felt the responsibility was his alone, and promised that once the mission was over, he would find a way to make amends. With that, he turned and vanished into the night. Half an hour later, we find him at the Kunsa group's hideout in Daxia. As he approached the entrance, the sound of loud, boisterous laughter drifted out from within. It was a chilling sound under the circumstances. A voice praised the Chache group, admitting they certainly had their ways of handling business with ruthless efficiency. Killing over 100 anti-drug officers was bound to cause an absolute storm in Daxia. Inside the main hall, Lord Wu of the Kunsa group and Black Monkey from the Chache group were busy clinking glasses in celebration. They were clearly in high spirits. When Lord Wu noticed him entering, he paused for a brief moment in surprise. Then, with a wide grin, he poured a glass of red wine and handed it over, calling him Old Sixth and promising great news. He took the wine and drained it in a single gulp, asking what this supposed good news was. Lord Wu seemed shocked he hadn't heard. He asked if he'd missed the television reports about their second phase of cooperation with the Chache group. The original plan was to transport 200 tons of product, but it turned out they had a mole in their own ranks. That mole had leaked the details to the Daxia police, but what the police didn't realize was that their entire plan was a trap. Everything was within their control, as the Chache group had simply turned the police's own plan against them. They had wiped out over 100 officers in one stroke, leaving only their leader, a man named Ding Hui, and a few others who were unlucky enough to survive, only to be dragged away by the Chache group. It was a satisfying victory for them, and as he finished the story, Lord Wu drained his glass in one go. Black Monkey was also grinning from ear to ear, while our protagonist remained outwardly cold and indifferent. Deep down, a thick, murderous intent was swirling in his eyes, nearly impossible to suppress. Black Monkey noticed his strange look. He asked Old Sixth why he wasn't happy about such good news, but he was ignored as the man simply asked who exactly this mole was. Black Monkey admitted he didn't know, having only heard rumors from the general. They had recently dealt with a mole named Sun Jun, but now, it seemed another one had suddenly surfaced. This new mole was proving to be elusive, and they weren't entirely sure of the person's identity just yet. For now, they were avoiding any sudden moves to keep from alerting them, while his own blood began to boil. It was confirmed. Sun Jun had indeed sacrificed his life. He then asked who from the Chache group had led this strike. Black Monkey replied that it was their group's infamous second-in-command, a man known as God. Apparently, God had been trained by the general since childhood and possessed some particularly cruel hobbies. He enjoyed studying ancient Daxia torture methods, ensuring that any officer who fell into his hands met a gruesome end. He couldn't stand to listen any longer, turning on his heel and walking away without a word. Black Monkey and Lord Wu shared a brief look, but said nothing. They were used to this strange behavior by now. After all, in their world, talented people were allowed to have their eccentricities. He stepped out of the villa, looking up at the sky as a terrifying wave of killing intent washed over him. He thought of this man, God. If that man dared to touch Instructor Ding or the others, he would make sure he died with his eyes open. He then returned home. We see him gently stroking Lin Rian's head, his heart heavy with an overwhelming sense of guilt and debt. For over 2 years, he felt he had utterly failed in his duties, having provided almost no care at all. And yet, seeing how obedient and understanding the girl remained, he couldn't help but feel deeply moved. In the hall, Shin Yuchu had finished preparing dinner when he quietly told her he had to leave for a while. Shin Yuchu's smile slowly stiffened as she asked if he really had to go, but the answer was a firm no. A heavy silence filled the room until, eventually, she lowered her head and told him to go, but to be careful. We later learned that she had intended to tell him some life-changing news, that she was pregnant again. But she chose silence to keep his mind clear. Later, under a bridge, his contact met him with an anxious look. The man warned him not to be impulsive, noting that Chache's power was currently at its absolute peak. That man known as God was a monster of cruelty, and going alone seemed like a suicide mission. Furthermore, the Daxia police were now launching a massive crackdown on the leaders of Chache and Kunsa. He was now one of their primary targets. He wasn't just facing a criminal empire, but the law itself. Too many lives had already been sacrificed to maintain his cover, and they couldn't afford to lose him now. He simply kept his head down, his voice eerily calm as he spoke his next words. If he couldn't save the instructor and the others, he felt he must at least bring their remains back home. He asked his contact not to stop him, promising he knew his limits before setting off entirely alone. The only thing his contact could do now was pull every string available to him in the shadows. He wanted to ensure the crossing at the border was smooth. Soon, he reached the line between Daxia and Wadian. Standing at the edge of the boundary, he reached out and touched the border marker with a gentle hand. It was as if he were caressing his own daughter, a silent plea to wait for his return as he headed out alone. We see him infiltrating the territory of the Chache group, a place of pure evil, as he pushes deep into the dense jungle. He survived on wild fruit when hungry and mountain springs when thirsty, traveling like this for over half a month. Finally, he reached the perimeter of the God faction's influence, where every man he saw held a rifle in his hands. Their eyes were filled with nothing but cruelty. He carefully avoided their patrols, slowly creeping closer to the heart of the camp. As he moved toward the center, he looked out over vast stretches of land that seemed to go on forever. People were working there tirelessly, and we see that the crops they were tending were rows upon rows of poisonous plants. These plants were the very source of all this evil. A few days later, he finally arrived at the lair of God himself. The villa ahead was the same one from the video where Ding Hui and the others were tortured. He was close now. He whispered a promise to bring his brothers home before quietly retreating to a hidden spot on a nearby mountain peak. After 2 days of careful observation, he finally managed to map out the entire layout of the armed forces. By the night of the 3rd day, he could no longer restrain himself. It was time to move. He moved like a ghost through the darkness, slipping past patrol after patrol with unnatural precision. Eventually, he reached the backyard of the villa, but as he looked up, his heart nearly stopped. Imagine the scene: 8 long bamboo poles standing in the yard, presenting a sight of absolute horror and grief. 8 objects that looked like leather balls were hanging there, but as he looked closer, he realized they weren't balls at all. They were the severed heads of Ding Hui and 7 other officers, their eyes still open in a final, bloody stare. Their faces were mangled beyond recognition, covered in layers of dark, dried blood that had long since congealed. He bit down hard on his own arm to keep from screaming as tears of agonizing grief poured down his face. With trembling hands, he carefully lowered the bamboo poles one by one, gently retrieving what remained of his comrades. He placed them inside a cloth wrap, securing it tightly before hoisting the heavy burden onto his back. He slowly retreated from the villa, eventually finding a small county town where he managed to acquire some lime. He also gathered materials to preserve the remains, performing a simple treatment to protect his fallen comrades. He worked quickly to prevent further decay before turning back toward the heart of the enemy territory. We return to the perimeter of God's lair, where another half-month has passed. Inside the villa, the atmosphere is heavy. The silence is terrifyingly absolute until a single gunshot rings out and a body collapses onto the floor. Everyone else in the villa keeps their heads bowed, their eyes filled with nothing but pure, unadulterated terror. It had been like this for 2 weeks, ever since the 8 bodies of the police officers had mysteriously vanished. God's temper had become explosive, and he executed men daily while screaming to know if they had found the culprit. He mocked his men's incompetence, yet he had no idea that at this very moment, just outside the villa, our protagonist was quietly creeping back in. Even with the theft of the 8 officers' remains, God had not bothered to strengthen his defenses. No one believed a thief would be bold enough to return. But he did return. Navigating through the security camera blind spots, he slowly leaped through an open window. The main hall was brightly lit, with fresh blood still staining the floor. Meanwhile, inside the master bedroom, God continued his relentless roaring. Even after killing countless subordinates, his rage remained unquenched. In that instant, the villain felt a sharp pain at the back of his head. The world went black, and he lost consciousness. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the sharp glint of a dagger. He found his hands and legs tightly bound, while a man stood before him with his back turned. The man was calmly heating the blade of the dagger over a flame. Slowly, he stood up to face his captive. Seeing the glowing red steel, God's pupils contracted in terror as he immediately began to beg for his life. He stammered, asking who the man was and what he wanted, promising all the money he had in exchange for mercy. Our protagonist ignored the pleas, turning instead toward the back of the cave, where a set of stone steps rose into the shadows. 8 dry cakes were placed there, and he looked toward the remains of his comrades, whispering for them to watch closely. He promised them that their revenge was finally at hand, and in that moment, God suddenly realized who stood before him. The villain scrambled to offer $500 million hidden in a Swiss bank, promising it all in exchange for his life. He urged the man to think. What was the point of being a narcotics officer when it only led to a meaningless death? He sneered, asking who would even see or care about the sacrifices made for the people of Dacia. He questioned who would even remember him, insisting that a simple nod would grant him a fortune of $500 million. With money, he claimed, one could have everything. By the time he finished, a confident smile had returned to God's eyes. He was certain that under such immense temptation, any normal person would surely choose to let him go. He expected a logical choice, yet under his bewildered gaze, our protagonist couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. His eyes were filled with pure mockery as he asked if this foreigner truly thought a few phrases of the language meant he understood Dacia. God stared back, his face a mask of terror and utter confusion at a resolve he couldn't possibly fathom. He simply could not understand why, in the face of such staggering wealth, the man remained unshakably loyal to his country. And to be honest, he never would. A man like him lacks the 5,000 years of civilization and cultural depth that forged such a spirit. Without that spiritual foundation, the concept of honor is invisible to him. Our protagonist continued to speak with a calm smile. He explained that compared to his faith and the motherland he sought to protect, those millions were utterly worthless. In the face of his people, even if all the wealth in the entire world were offered, it would mean nothing at all. He looked at the trembling man with disdain, telling him to take his money and offer his repentance in hell instead. Gripping the glowing red dagger, he slowly approached as the villain tried to crawl backward in a desperate, pathetic retreat. God began to scream that he surrendered, pathetically claiming that he was now a prisoner of war under Dacia's protection. He desperately shouted that they were required to treat prisoners well and couldn't kill him, insisting he could only be judged by Dacia's laws. God screamed like a madman, accusing our protagonist of breaking the law by carrying out an illegal execution. His eyes betrayed a frantic hunger for life. He knew that if he could just survive this moment, his associates would receive word. He was certain they would send a rescue team, giving him a slim chance to escape, or at the very least, a chance to face a proper court. Even if a Dacia court sentenced him to death, it would be a quick end, but our protagonist clearly had no intention of making things that easy. He wasn't about to let God slip away into the peace of death quite so comfortably. After finishing his preparations, he grabbed the man by the collar and then silently turned his back on the villain's pleas. He placed the dagger over the flames once more, while behind him, God began to let out a series of agonizing, primal wails. This time, the torment lasted for an entire day and night, a grueling span of time for anyone involved, to be sure. The man lost consciousness more times than we can count, but he was always quickly jolted awake until the day and night had finally passed. Our protagonist looked toward the remains of Ding Hui and the instructor, whispering that he had finally avenged his fallen brothers. He asked if they could see his work before turning to leave the cave, but strangely, he didn't head back toward the Dacia border. Instead, he moved deeper into enemy territory toward God's main hideout, a sight that left everyone watching the screen in utter shock. People couldn't help but wonder what Lin Hui was doing. Why on earth would he be heading back there now? But return he did. After all, with hundreds of Dacia's narcotics officers dead, the life of a single god was hardly enough to balance the scales. When he appeared again, we see him standing before a vast, seemingly endless field of cherry blossoms. Next to the beautiful flowers sat a small factory, a place specifically designed to refine the harvest from these very plants. He found a concealed position and waited patiently for the cover of darkness to settle over the landscape. Inside the factory was a fuel depot used to power the refining machinery, a perfect target for someone with his particular set of skills. With quiet precision, he began to open the lids of the fuel barrels one by one, preparing for what came next. He then emptied every single fuel barrel, letting the liquid flow down the slope and directly into the vast fields of cherry blossoms. Half an hour later, we see him pull out a lighter and toss it into the factory, triggering a massive, deafening roar. A towering inferno surged into the sky, and the factory was engulfed in flames in an instant. The brilliant light of the fire immediately caught the attention of the nearby patrol teams. Countless people came pouring out of the bamboo and thatched huts, running and shouting in a state of total, frantic chaos. Unfortunately for them, the fire was too large, and the sweltering heat combined with a lack of water made it unstoppable. The flames quickly spread into the cherry blossom fields, consuming everything, which was exactly what he wanted. He watched it all burn, standing in the darkness while the towering flames behind him illuminated his silhouette. The screen fades to black, and when we return, we find ourselves standing before a quiet field of graves. Strangely, these tombstones bore no names of the deceased, nor did they list any details of the lives they lived. There were no written descriptions at all. Instead, each one bore the same 4 powerful words. They were the graves of martyrs. He found 8 new plots and laid his fallen comrades to rest in the empty earth. As he covered them with soil, he whispered to his instructor and brothers that they could finally rest in peace. His eyes grew red once more as heavy tears began to fall, the memories of his friends still fresh in his mind. He could still see Ding Hui's bright smile and remembered the heavy moment when they had last said their goodbyes. The iron-willed man's eyes welled up. He never imagined that these brave, strong soldiers would end up like this. Now, they lay in the cold ground, resting under tombstones that didn't even bear their names. A bitter reality, to be sure. He wiped away his tears, stood tall, and gave the 8 graves a final, perfect military salute. A few days later, a news report shocked all of Dachau, detailing the horrific trap that had been set. It spoke of the ambush of over 100 narcotics officers and the brutal killing of Ding Hui and the others. The report detailed how the hideout of a major drug lord in Wadian, the murderer of the 8 officers, had been utterly destroyed. Hundreds of acres of crops were reduced to ash by a massive fire, and in an instant, all of Dachau was buzzing with excitement. Everyone cheered, and we see that the public assumed the Dachau police had finally taken decisive action. To maintain the people's high spirits, the Dachau police simply allowed the public to believe that version of events. However, only one man knew the truth of who was behind it. As we return to Ding Hui's grave, Ouyang Chun stared at the sky, his face filled with a deep, visible excitement for his fallen comrade. He whispered that the young man was truly the most elite soldier under Ding Hui's command. A few days later, after being gone for months, Ling Hui finally returned to the Kunsa group's hideout. He had been missing for quite some time, and yet, strangely enough, no one in the Kunsa group had even noticed his long absence. This was because, during those months, the 4 great devils had continued to operate in Dachau, using his name every single day. By clearing out the remnants of rival drug trafficking forces, they made the Kunsa group believe even more firmly that Ling Hui was the one personally handling these affairs. Inside his study, the 4 great devils stood before him. He told them they had done well these past months, and they thanked Lord Six for the praise. The 4 great devils were clearly thrilled. As for where he had disappeared to during those months, they had no intention of asking any questions. After all, he had always been a man of mystery who came and went like a ghost. He asked if anything major had happened during this time, and they informed him that nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. However, they noted that Lord Five had looked for him several times, insisting he go see him immediately upon his return. He stood up and made his way toward Lord Five's hideout, and as soon as he arrived at the villa, he saw Old Wu of the Kunsa group slam his hand on the table, his face pale with a cold, iron-like fury. At that moment, Old Wu spotted him and noted he had finally arrived. Ling Hui looked at Kunsa's Lord Five with feigned confusion. Old Wu tells him that he was absolutely right. The Chakai group has indeed started causing all sorts of trouble. It seems the first batch of goods they were supposed to transport together has run into a serious problem, all thanks to that idiot Shangdi. For no good reason, he insisted on brutally killing those anti-drug officers, and now, well, the consequences have arrived. Dachau wasted no time and sent people to completely level his hideout. Even after the Dachau police burned everything to the ground, the Chakai group actually had the nerve to ask for more. They want another shipment sent immediately, which makes Old Wu wonder if they've lost their minds entirely. Lord Five is so furious, he's practically fuming, admitting he should have listened to Ling Hui from the start. He regrets not getting rid of Black Monkey when he had the chance, while Ling Hui remains perfectly calm, telling him to relax. Since it has already happened, he notes that getting angry won't help, and asks what the big boss has to say about it. The boss is also incredibly angry, but with Dachau taking such a hardline stance right now, their hands are tied. They can't move against the Chakai group just yet. They have to wait for the heat to die down. Then, Old Wu remembers something. In a few days, it will be the big boss's 60th birthday, so he tells Ling Hui not to head back home today. Tomorrow, they will set out together to help the boss celebrate. Lord Five looks up at him expectantly. Ling Hui pauses for a moment, the voices of Shun Yuchu and Lin Rian echoing clearly in his mind. A powerful sense of longing nearly consumes him, yet he knows this trip to assist Kunsa is an opportunity. It is a chance to gain a much deeper understanding of the Kunsa group, and it's one he simply cannot afford to miss. For Kunsa's grand birthday, major regional leaders from all over the world begin their journeys early. No one wants to risk arriving late and earning Kunsa's displeasure, because, as we can imagine, that never ends well. The fate of those who upset him is usually quite grim. And so, Lord Five, the 4 great devils, and a few of Lord Five's most trusted men, 15 people in total, pile into cars and leave Dachau behind. Our journey takes us toward Wadian, arriving on the very eve of Kunsa's grand birthday celebration. Lord 5 and Ling Hui finally reach the Kunsa group headquarters, though this time, there is no need for a hood. As the newly minted 6th lord of the group, he has earned the right to enter with his face uncovered. Inside Kunsa's villa, the lights are blazing and the air is thick with the noise of a rowdy crowd. As they reach the entrance, 2 young henchmen step forward and offer a respectful, if cautious, greeting. They apologize for the intrusion before beginning a thorough pat-down, checking both Lord 5 and Ling Hui. All weapons, including their handguns, are confiscated. Once the search is complete, the 2 men are cleared. Only then do they proceed inside, while the 4 great devils and the other men are left behind. The subordinates simply don't have the status to enter the main hall. As Ling Hui steps inside, he scans the room. He immediately spots Kunsa, a man in his 60s, holding his signature gentleman's cane with quiet authority. Beside him sit the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th lords. Ling Hui recognizes the 4th lord immediately. He is the thin, frail-looking old man who had secretly monitored him in the past. The 3rd lord is quite the opposite. A burly man with a face full of scars, he was once a brutal underground boxing champion known as He Huang. The 2nd lord, a man cut from the same cloth as Kunsa himself, is a figure of composed power. His name is Kunbu, and aside from Kunsa, he holds the most significant influence within the entire organization. He handles over 1,000 tons of narcotics every year, a staggering amount, to be perfectly honest. As we see the 2 newcomers enter, Kunsa and his inner circle turn their heads. He Huang lets out a boisterous laugh. He is the first to stand and welcome them, shouting that Lord 5 and Lord 6 have finally returned. Kunsa looks up as well, a faint, unreadable smile playing in his eyes as he acknowledges their arrival. However, the 4th lord speaks up with a sinister edge, noting how busy they must be to arrive so late. Returning on the very last day before the grand celebration, the 4th lord's eyes are filled with a cold, sinister sneer. His gaze lingers heavily on Ling Hui, staring at the man who, only a few short years ago, was a mere nobody in the Kunsa group, someone he could have crushed like an insect at any moment. Seeing Ling Hui now standing as his equal creates a bitter sense of resentment deep within the 4th lord's heart. Most importantly, every time they meet, Ling Hui shows not even a flicker of fear or reverence toward him. This lack of respect irritates him to no end, prompting Lord 5 to step in and ask him not to be angry. Lord 5 explains that he and Ling Hui have been fighting desperately to secure the market these past few months. They have wiped out 5 smaller factions, working tirelessly for the good of the group, which is a fair point, really. Otherwise, they would have arrived much sooner. Lord 5 frowns slightly as he finishes, but the 4th lord only chuckles. He asks if Lord 5 is implying that the 2nd and 3rd lords, along with himself, are somehow useless for arriving early. He wonders aloud if they are merely freeloaders who haven't been expanding the group's territory like the newcomers have. The 4th lord sneers, and just as Lord 5 prepares to defend them further, Ling Hui reaches out a hand to stop him, turning his steady gaze directly toward the 4th lord. He tells the old man that if he has a problem, he should say it plainly instead of hiding behind these verbal traps. As those words hang in the air, the 4th lord freezes, his expression darkening into something truly foul. He snaps that Ling Hui is far too arrogant and asks if he truly believes he is untouchable in this house. Ling Hui's face twists with a sudden, violent intensity as he clenches his fists, a terrifying aura beginning to radiate from him. He remembers the pit in Kunsa's back garden, filled with the bleached bones of those this executioner has murdered. Knowing that this man is the butcher responsible, Ling Hui finds it impossible to feel anything resembling respect. To be honest, it is a miracle he can even control the urge to kill him right then and there. The 4th lord snaps that Ling Hui is truly lawless, accusing him of having no respect for their big brother or any of the seniors. Finding himself in a difficult position with no easy way out, the 4th lord finally turns his gaze toward Kunsa. Seeing the 4th lord resort to such tactics, He Huang can't help but let out a sudden, mocking laugh. They hadn't expected the 4th lord to back down so easily, and in that moment, their disdain for him only grows. After all, he is supposed to be the number 4 figure in the entire Kunsa group. Having been with the organization for over a decade, it is quite a sight to see him so intimidated by a young man. To be honest, it is an embarrassment to all the veterans within the group's inner circle. He Huang points out that the 4th lord was the one looking for trouble, and now he's trying to play the victim. He grins, his eyes filled with even more contempt for the older man as he watches the scene unfold. Deep down, he finds himself admiring Ling Hui's direct and uncompromising style of handling things. Hearing He Huang's laughter, the 4th lord's expression turns even more sour as he speaks in a low, sinister tone. He tells He Huang that this matter has absolutely nothing to do with him, glaring at him with pure frustration. His fists are clenched tight, but He Huang only stares back, refusing to show even a hint of weakness. The atmosphere in the villa becomes instantly tense, as if a single spark could set the whole room ablaze. And here we see the corner of Kunsa's mouth twitch upward into a very slight, knowing smile. As the undisputed leader of the Black Triangle, the last thing he wants is for his subordinates to be too harmonious. He actually prefers to see them locked in constant power struggles and hidden rivalries. It is only through this internal friction that he can maintain a perfect balance over his vast criminal empire, ensuring that everything remains firmly within his grasp. Kunsa finally lets his cold, lazy voice ring out through the room. He tells them that is enough, reminding them they are brothers and that bickering the moment they meet is simply beneath them. Kunsa tells everyone to take their seats and orders the servants to bring out the food so they can talk while they eat. The brothers comply, and soon after, a beautiful maid appears with a serving cart. She pushes the cart filled with Chinese cuisine toward the group and begins placing the dishes on the table in front of Ling Hui. Kunsa mentions that he knows Ling Hui enjoys the food from the Great Mansion, so he went to great lengths to find someone special. He explains that he brought in one of the world's top Chinese chefs, and these dishes are his handiwork. Kunsa looks at Ling Hui and encourages him to give them a try to see how they taste. Looking at the exquisite dishes laid out before him, Ling Hui's eyes can't help but light up with genuine interest. He picks up his chopsticks, takes a few bites of the meal, and gives a slow, appreciative nod. He remarks that the Buddha jumps over the wall is quite authentic, though he notes a small detail about the spicy chicken. Because the peppers aren't specifically from the Great Mansion region, the flavor is just a bit off. Kunsa laughs heartily, saying that as long as Ling Hui is pleased, that is all that matters. Since he enjoys the food so much, Kunsa decides to give him the chef who made the soup as a gift, ordering his men to bring the man out. With a wave of Kunsa's hand, two subordinates appear, dragging a man along with them. The man is dressed in a chef's uniform and appears to be in his 50s. His face is covered in bruises from a beating, and his feet are shackled. He keeps his head low the entire time. He is clearly consumed by fear, but Kunsa simply introduces him as a world-famous chef from the Great Mansion. Kunsa wears a smile as he tells Ling Hui that from now on, this man will be his personal, exclusive chef. Then, his expression turns instantly cold as he snaps at the chef, demanding he greet his new master, the Sixth Lord. He warns the man that if Ling Hui hadn't praised his cooking, he would have been buried long ago. Terrified and trembling, the chef quickly drops to his knees on the floor in front of Ling Hui. The chef calls out to the Sixth Lord, and Ling Hui nods coldly, though we see him take note of the man's many injuries. Deep down, he is clenching his fists in silent fury, and it is at this exact moment that the atmosphere shifts. Kunsa's face suddenly turns cold once again, his mood shifting with terrifying speed, simply because Ling Hui mentioned that the spicy chicken wasn't quite to his liking. Kunsa orders his men to drag the kitchen staff outside to be executed. Ling Hui starts to speak up to stop them, but several gunshots already ring out from outside. Kunsa curses under his breath before turning back to him. He asks with genuine confusion what's wrong, and Ling Hui slowly shakes his head, keeping his thoughts to himself. An hour later, the banquet concludes. As he and Lao Wu leave the villa, they see the aftermath outside. Several of Kunsa's men are busy washing away the blood, leaving faint crimson stains across the ground. The sight is a sharp sting to his eyes. These people died because of him, or rather, because of his words. It took only a single sentence to trigger Kunsa's brutality. Early the next morning, we return to the villa courtyard, which is now filled with many new figures. Most are high-ranking leaders of the Kunsa group or regional heads from distant territories. When they see Ling Hui and Lao Wu approaching, everyone immediately bows with practiced respect. However, we notice a few individuals whose gazes are anything but friendly. These are the men loyal to Kunsa's rivals, Longxi and Lao Shu. As time passes, more powerful figures begin to arrive at Kunsa's stronghold, including representatives from across the Black Triangle. There is Bong, the number 3 man of the Chakai group, and the second-in-command of the Luo Xinghan group, Long Yichun, among others. These major syndicates, along with Kunsa, form the backbone of a global network. This is the vast and shadowed world of the drug trade, and we watch as its most powerful players continue to arrive. A flicker of regret passes through Ling Hui's eyes as he realizes that if only the top leaders had all gathered here today, he could have wiped them all out in one fell swoop, dealing a devastating blow to the entire drug trade. Instead, we see the high-ranking guests being received by Ling Hui and several other key members of the Kunsa group. Ling Hui finds himself playing host to Long Yichun, the second-in-command of the powerful Luo Xinghan group. As Ling Hui observes him, Long Yichun is also sizing him up, and he is the first to break the silence. He admits he never expected the famous Sixth Lord of Kunsa to be a fellow countryman from Great Xia. Long Yichun remarks that the Sixth Lord is remarkably young and successful, but Ling Hui simply smiles and shakes his head. He modestly replies that compared to a senior like Long, his own work is just child's play, a polite deflection, of course. Nearby, Lao Si, who is hosting the Mexican cartel, turns his head and shoots a glance filled with hidden resentment toward Ling Hui. When noon finally arrives, Kunsa makes his entrance, slowly walking out from the second floor of the villa. The entire courtyard falls silent in an instant, and every person present turns toward him with a look of practiced reverence. Even the heads of the major corporations bowed their heads in respect at this moment, offering a humble greeting. Such as the terrifying prestige Kunsa holds over the Black Triangle. He tells them all there is no need for such formality. He acknowledges that they are all core figures of their respective groups and thanks them for coming despite their busy schedules. He expresses his deep gratitude to everyone for taking the time to attend his birthday banquet. With smiles all around and Kunsa finally present, the atmosphere of the banquet begins to reach its peak. We see the guests laughing and drinking together, while over by Medellin of the Golden Star Moon Group, Lao Si is whispering something into Medellin's ear, and the two of them keep glancing over at Ling Hui. Not long after, Medellin suddenly stands up, which is never a sign of a quiet afternoon. He walks toward our protagonist with a glass in hand and asks, "Excuse me, are you Mr. Ling Hui?" The sixth lord of the Kunsa group, a man known to many as Asura, the god of war. His words are laced with a distinct arrogance and disdain, but Ling Hui simply watches Medellin with an expressionless face. He then glances toward Lao Si in the distance, knowing full well that dog is behind this trouble again. The general's man barks out, asking if he's deaf and why he isn't answering General Medellin. Seeing that our protagonist remains silent, one of Medellin's followers loses his patience entirely. He points a finger and roars with a contorted face, a shout that echoes through the quiet courtyard. The entire scene freezes for a heartbeat as the guests turn their heads, their eyes filled with mocking curiosity. They watch the two of them like a theater performance, and the moment the follower opens his mouth, the four great ghosts standing by Ling Hui's side glare at the man with murderous intent. Their faces are masks of rage, but Ling Hui reaches out to stop them. Then, under everyone's gaze, he smiles. He asks the man for his name, a question that catches Medellin's follower completely off guard. The man lifts his chin and identifies himself as Qiao Qianan. Qiao Qianan, Ling Hui repeats. "I'll remember that. A year from today, I'll make sure someone burns incense for you." At those words, the mood shifts instantly. No one expected him to actually make a move at Kunsa's own banquet, but with a speed that defies belief. He seizes Qiao Qianan by the throat and exerts a sudden, violent force. In the very next heartbeat, the man has become nothing more than a cold corpse. As the realization finally sinks in for the crowd, a collective gasp ripples through the air. Medellin screams, "Ling Hui, you dare kill one of my men." He roars like a wounded lion, and his remaining followers immediately begin to close in on our protagonist. They stare him down with pure hatred, yet Ling Hui calmly accepts a towel and begins to wipe his hands. He looks up at Medellin and remarks quite simply that the general's dog was being disobedient and barking at him. He notes that the man clearly lacked discipline, and since he enjoys being helpful, Medellin really doesn't need to thank him. Medellin's fists clench tight and his eyes bulge with fury, but the moment he tries to step forward, the four great ghosts surround him instantly, while nearby, the armed guards shift their positions. The members of the Kunsa group responsible for maintaining order tighten their grip on their weapons as well. Medellin's face turns a sickly shade of iron gray. We can see he wants nothing more than to kill Ling Hui right now. However, this is Kunsa group territory, and Medellin finds himself with no room to move. To be honest, he's trapped. Left with no choice, he turns his gaze toward the host. "Mr. Kunsa," he begins, his voice trembling with rage. "I came all the way from Mexico to celebrate with you. Is this truly how you treat your guests?" Kunsa, who had been enjoying the performance until now, simply grins and asks what Medellin would like to do about it. Medellin demands his death for killing a follower and insulting the Golden Triangle group. Kunsa simply replies, "Fine." A single gunshot rings out, before the look of smug satisfaction can even fade from Medellin's face. He has already collapsed into a lifeless corpse. The crowd watches, frozen in absolute disbelief at the sudden turn. We see Kunsa calmly hand his pistol to a nearby attendant, his expression as peaceful as a still lake. Medellin's remaining men stare down at their leader's body, their frames beginning to tremble uncontrollably. They are caught between fury and pure terror, but Kunsa merely waves a hand. A few more shots echo through the air. In an instant, Medellin's followers are also lying in pools of blood. Then, Kunsa's voice rises, calm and steady. He reminds everyone that Ling Hui is the sixth lord of the Kunsa group and represents the organization itself. To demand the death of his sixth lord is, in his eyes, a direct slap to his own face, which, naturally, he cannot allow. He then looks out at the guests, his face suddenly full of apologies for the unpleasantness they just witnessed. He tells everyone to continue eating and drinking as if nothing happened, and with those words, the matter is settled. Slowly, the atmosphere begins to recover, and we see the guests return to their drinking and toasts. Ling Hui knows that while Medellin's outburst was provoked by the fourth lord, there was more to it. This was actually another test from Kunsa had he failed to handle it properly. Or worse, brought shame upon the Kunsa group. His own end would have been just as grim. A powerful warlord like Kunsa simply will not tolerate having useless people in his inner circle. The banquet soon reaches its peak, and before long, the general guests begin to depart. Only the heads of the major syndicates remain, following Kunsa into his private villa. Once inside, the traffickers begin to pull out their various tools. To be honest, it's a grim sight. The room is quickly filled with thick smoke, while Ling Hui sits alone in the corner, merely watching. His refusal to join in soon draws suspicious glances, and the fourth lord is the first to notice. With a predatory glint in his eyes, he approaches Ling Hui and demands to know if he is a cop. The air in the room turns cold instantly. Every eye is now fixed on our protagonist, waiting. Kunsa, wearing the smile of a deceptive Buddha, tells him that as the sixth lord, he must participate. Ling Hui is well aware that if his identity as an undercover agent is revealed, he is a dead man. Left with no choice, he takes the equipment and begins to put on a convincing performance. Fortunately, he had studied the habits of these traffickers in detail before starting this mission. Seeing his practiced movements, Kunsa and the others finally relax and offer satisfied smiles. Meanwhile, Ling Hui has to fight back the overwhelming sense of disgust at the foul smell. He knows this poison destroys even the strongest men, ruining countless lives and families alike. After another half hour of this dark gathering, the remaining guests finally go their separate ways. Ling Hui forces himself to stand, masking his physical agony as he leaves and finally returns to the privacy of his own room. The artificial rush begins to fade, replaced by a crushing headache, dizziness, and the terrifying sensation of his breathing slowing down. A wave of side effects begins to erode his mind, and as his consciousness starts to blur, he pulls a small knife from his pocket and carves a bloody cross into his own leg. He collapses onto the floor, letting the blood flow freely as he fights a desperate battle to stay conscious. More than an hour passes before that agonizing sensation finally begins to recede. Drenched in sweat, he slowly sits up and leans against the wall, his eyes vacant and staring into nothingness. Looking out at the darkness beyond his window, he can no longer hold back the tears and begins to weep in silence. He drops to his knees, his hands desperately striking his own head. When he first chose to become a gray man, an undercover agent, he knew a day like this would eventually come. But knowing it and living it are two very different things. A profound sense of shame washes over him, a spiritual agony that weighs far heavier than any physical wound. To be honest, this kind of pain is the hardest to endure. But time, as it always does, continues to move forward. We move now to the woods outside the Kunsa group's stronghold, where Xiaoyang pulls his jacket tight against the chill. Pairs of police officers, clad in bulletproof vests and clutching their firearms, emerge from the shadows. They advance cautiously through the darkness, watching this unfold on the screen. A middle-aged man in the courtroom cannot hide his excitement. You see, the man leading the charge at the front of the line is the commander of this decapitation strike, Su Weigua. He also happens to hold another title. He was one of Ling Hui's old comrades from their university days. On the screen, Su Weigua leads a squad of nearly 100 men, carefully navigating around the Kunsa group's hidden sentries and guards with practiced precision. They head straight for the heart of the stronghold, guided by the precise intelligence provided by their inside man. This day marks the 50th birthday of the drug lord Kunsa, an occasion that brings together every leader within the Kunsa group. They are all scheduled to gather on this day, and not just the Kunsa group, but also the Chakai group from the Black Triangle. Even world-class syndicates from the Silver Triangle are sending representatives to offer their congratulations to Kunsa. Upon learning of this massive gathering, the high-ranking officials at headquarters immediately decided to deploy a decapitation strike team. The objective is a surgical strike against the Kunsa group's leadership and the representatives sent by the various drug trafficking syndicates. If the operation succeeds, it won't just inflict massive losses on these international criminal organizations. It will also provide justice for the narcotics officers who died so tragically recently, despite Xiao Yang's best efforts to argue against it. His warnings fall on deaf ears. His reasoning is simple. He hasn't received any intel from his informant, which is to say, Ling Hui. He believes that if there were truly a chance to wipe out so many drug lords at once, Ling Hui would never miss the opportunity. However, very few people are willing to believe Xiaoyang anymore. You see, the last time his informant provided intelligence, it resulted in the deaths of nearly 200 men, even though they have no concrete evidence to prove that Ling Hui has turned traitor. They are simply no longer willing to place their trust in him. The team quickly approaches the Kunsa group's stronghold. As they look out over the cluster of single-story buildings, they spot the luxurious villa nestled in the center. Su Weigua and his men cannot help but let out a small smile. This is exactly where the informant's report said Kunsa's nest would be. Everyone synchronizes their watches. The operation begins in 3 minutes. On the horizon, the first light of dawn is about to break. 3 minutes later, Su Weigua gives a sharp wave of his hand. Several team members move like ghosts through the shadows, silently taking out the guards at the entrance. As they draw closer to the villa, the expressions on their faces are a mix of intense tension and solemnity. Closer, even closer now, as every man tightens his grip on his weapon. This mission is a gamble with death, and their only hope is to move fast enough to catch Kunsa and his leaders in one fell swoop. The plan was to strike and retreat before Kunsa's men could even react. Over there, the joint forces of Daxia and Wadian were waiting to support them. But just as Su Weigua and his team were about to enter the villa, a fierce volley of gunfire erupted from the darkness. We see the once silent villa transform as gun barrels spit out hideous tongues of flame. Caught completely off guard, over a dozen team members were cut down in an instant. Su Weigua's eyes widened in horror, his mind reeling as the truth hit him. It was an ambush. He ordered a full retreat, realizing the intelligence was compromised. The Kunsa group's posture made it clear. They had known about the operation all along and had laid a perfect trap, simply waiting for them to walk in. But how could the enemy have obtained such precise details? Amidst his confusion, screams filled the air. One by one, the narcotics officers were riddled with bullets, falling lifelessly to the ground. Su Weiguo roared for a retreat as the surviving officers fought with everything they had to pull back. They returned fire toward the villa, but then, blinding rows of headlights pierced the night. The darkness was washed away as machine guns mounted on the vehicles began a frantic, deadly sweep. Watching his comrades fall felt like a knife to Su Weiguo's heart. Using the glare of the headlights, he scanned the terrain and commanded his men to flee toward the dense forest on the back mountain. The Kunsa group was too well prepared and far too numerous. On foot, they could never outrun the trucks. The thick forest was their only hope for survival. At the very moment the gunfire broke out, Ling Hui jolted awake. Stepping out of his room, he saw the chaos illuminated by the headlights, and his heart sank. Hearing Su Weiguo's desperate commands in the unmistakable language of Daxia, he knew instantly that these men were a team sent from home. But from the look of things, they were walking into a slaughter. Something had clearly gone terribly wrong with this mission. There was no doubt that the Kunsa group was far too prepared. As Ling Hui wondered how they could have set such a perfect ambush, his eyes narrowed sharply with sudden intensity. A wave of murderous aura erupted from him as he remembered that just a few months ago, Ding Hui and nearly 200 narcotics officers and armed police had been lured into a similar trap. And now, right before his eyes, this new team of officers was clearly facing the exact same fate. Deep down, he knew there was something fishy going on, just as He Huang's voice thundered from the second floor. He shouted for Ling Hui to stop dazing around, grab a gun, and help him ensure none of these cops left alive. Though his heart was filled with inner turmoil, Ling Hui led the four great demons and charged down with weapons in hand. He leaned in and whispered a strict command to the four great demons. They were to aim their shots toward the sky. After a moment of stunned confusion, the four of them nodded solemnly, understanding the hidden gravity of his words. With He Huang and the other leaders joining the fray with their men, more and more narcotics officers fell into pools of blood in an instant, while Ling Hui and his group appeared to be firing relentlessly at the police. In the heat of the chaos, however, no one noticed that their barrels were actually tilted slightly toward the empty air. Finally, after leaving behind nearly half of their comrades as corpses, Su Weiguo and the survivors retreated into the forest. Looking back at the bodies scattered across the ground, Su Weiguo felt a grief so sharp it was almost physical. His eyes were bloodshot. These young men of Daxia had arrived full of life and vigor only moments ago. They had entered this dragon's den without fear, driven by their hatred of evil, only to be met with nothing but cold, heartless gunfire. Su Weiguo's heart ached as if pierced by a blade, and one word haunted him: traitor. He was certain there was a mole among the informants. Perhaps the very person who provided the lead was the traitor. For now, their only priority was to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the Kunsa group's stronghold. As the survivors vanished into the forest, He Huang flew into a violent rage, screaming that they were all useless for letting so many escape. He ordered everyone to give chase and kill them all, while Ling Hui leaned in and whispered a final instruction to the four great demons. He told them to remember his words as they split up to hunt and instructed them on what to say if they encountered the others. They were to claim he had simply gotten lost while pursuing the cops, a plan the four great demons accepted with a respectful nod. They disappeared into the darkness, and a moment later, we see Ling Hui stop before a narcotics officer lying in a pool of blood. He looked down at the officer, who was already devoid of any signs of life, and for a brief second, a flash of deep sorrow crossed his eyes. He began to run frantically, and before long, he had put a significant distance between himself and the rest of the Kunsa group members. Watching this unfold on the screens outside, the audience couldn't help but erupt into a chaotic wave of shouting and disbelief. Many claimed this was proof that Ling Hui had truly defected, mocking those who had still held onto a shred of faith in him. They pointed out that he was running the fastest of all the pursuers, and just as everyone was sinking into a state of deep disappointment, a sudden cry of surprise rang out from the crowd as they watched Ling Hui's figure through the darkness of the screen. The man who had been sprinting at top speed suddenly came to a halt when he spotted a single narcotics officer lagging behind the group. While the officer fled in a panic, Ling Hui raised his flashlight, and while the audience was still dazed by his movements, he suddenly changed course and began sprinting in the opposite direction, moving through the trees like a ghost of the night. He shifted his position constantly, and every time he fired his weapon into the darkness ahead, we see the results of his precision. The beam of his flashlight cut through the shadows, revealing the red scars of battle and the chaos unfolding in the forest. He used the light to startle the pursuing forces, momentarily blinding them as he navigated the treacherous terrain with ease. The sudden glare caught the pursuers off guard, allowing Ling Hui to manipulate the flow of the chase from the shadows. He continued to move like a phantom, repositioning himself with every shot he took to ensure his location remained a mystery. And yet, every time a figure fell to the ground, it was always a member of the Kunsa group, never the officers he was supposedly hunting. 5 members of the Kunsa group opened fire wildly, and in an instant, a narcotics officer collapsed to the ground. They rushed over immediately, their faces twisted with excitement as they watched the officer struggling in pain. Laughing, they decided to bind him and bring him to Siyi, who apparently preferred his captives alive. What they didn't notice, however, was that Ling Hui had already appeared behind them, moving with sudden, violent force. He covered the last man's mouth, and after a series of brutal exchanges, he found himself struck by 3 bullets. By the time he finished off the last enemy, he felt as though every ounce of his strength had been drained away. He slumped back against a corpse, sitting beside the fallen narcotics officer who was still clinging to his final breaths. The officer stared at Ling Hui's face in utter disbelief, his mind racing through the classified files he had seen on him. This was the 6th master of the Kunsa group, the infamous Shura of the Gray Zone, and yet, here he was. The officer couldn't fathom why such a man would turn on his own comrades, but then Ling Hui looked up at him. A smile suddenly broke across his blood-stained face, and he whispered a single, staggering word, "Comrade." As the word hung in the air, the officer's pupils contracted in shock, and he let out a gasp of pure disbelief. He asked if Ling Hui was an undercover gray man, though it seemed impossible given the mission briefings he'd received. The higher-ups hadn't mentioned a gray man within the Kunsa group, and usually, such information is vital to prevent friendly fire. In any normal operation, the command center would have notified the undercover agents well in advance to ensure their safety. The officer began to wonder if the notification had simply failed to reach them, but then he suddenly went quiet. Ling Hui's face was a mask of bitter irony. He began to laugh, though the laughter soon turned into silent tears. He muttered in pain that no one had been notified because everyone believed he had truly defected to the other side. It seems the whole world doubted him, and in the end, even Ouyang Chun had lost faith in who he really was. He wondered how Ouyang Chun, of all people, could forget his true nature and the memory of his parents, brothers, and instructors. He shouted that they had all died at the hands of these drug lords, asking why anyone would think he'd ever join them. They had an agreement, after all, that even if the whole world doubted him, Ouyang Chun would always believe. He hadn't kept his word. The realization that even his mentor didn't trust him caused Ling Hui to let out a roar of absolute agony, a broken cry from a grown man. He wept with a heartbreaking intensity, his tears falling heavily as he spoke of how he never feared being drawn into the darkness. Even when the darkness wrapped around him so tightly he couldn't breathe, he never once flinched. To be honest, they were simply police officers. The most shameless group of all, forced to live in the shadows while risking their lives every single day without recognition. He wasn't afraid of the danger. He only feared that no one in the world could prove that while he stood in the darkness, his heart was always facing the light. He feared there would be no one on the side of the light to pull him back when he was drowning. He didn't fear death, but he feared being forgotten. Outside the screen, a heavy silence fell as everyone watched the scene unfold. They watched Ling Hui, a man dissolved into tears and roaring with resentment, and for the first time, the audience fell completely silent. Su Weiguo was silent, and Lin Rian was silent too, as the same question haunted them. Had they truly misunderstood Ling Hui all along? He was clearly one of their gray men, a man who sacrificed everything for the mission. And yet, we see the tragic reality of his situation. He had somehow become a target for his own comrades' rifles. One can only imagine how much his heart must have ached in that moment. Without any real evidence, they had simply suspected him of defecting. The whole world had already turned its back on him. Now, even his handlers had abandoned him, going so far as to exclude him entirely from the details of this latest operation. It was clear they were prepared to gun Ling Hui down alongside the rest of the vicious traffickers, treating him as just another criminal. How could they do this? His parents, his comrades, and his brothers had all perished at the hands of these very same monsters. The idea that he would betray his country was absurd. After all, these gray men are the most selfless of officers, living lives that can never see the light of day. And now, the only person who could prove his heart was pure had stopped believing in him. The depth of his despair was unfathomable, leaving the viewers feeling a pain so sharp it was almost impossible to breathe. As they listened to Ling Hui's desperate cries, we can truly feel the sheer weight of his hopelessness. Su Weiguo suddenly stood up, his face flushing a deep, angry red from the intensity of his emotions. His breathing became heavy and ragged as he demanded to know what on earth was going on. He couldn't understand why no one notified Ling Hui, especially after the man had sacrificed so much for his country. For so many years, he had lived under the false impression that Ling Hui was the one who betrayed them. He believed Ling Hui knew about the ambush and had intentionally sent them into a death trap. But the truth was far uglier. No one had told him anything, and they were expected to just gun him down. The realization was chilling, and as Su Weiguo spoke, his eyes shimmered with a mixture of rage and tears. It was clear now that Ling Hui hadn't defected. Otherwise, he wouldn't have risked his life to stop Kuan Sa's men. Even though he had been abandoned by his own people, when he saw his former comrades in danger, Ling Hui didn't hesitate for a single second to step forward and protect them from certain death. He was literally trading his life to hold back the Kuan-sa group, all while breaking down in tears. One can only imagine the depth of his despair in that moment, having given up everything for a cause. He had sacrificed his chance to live in the light, choosing instead to walk through the shadows for his country. He had built an invisible wall for the people, keeping the darkness at bay where no one could see it. He never betrayed his nation, yet his nation had cast him aside, leaving Su Weiguo with bloodshot, tearful eyes. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. A stern, authoritative voice answered from the other end. Su Weiguo's voice was terrifyingly cold as he asked if they were watching Ling Hui's trial. Silence followed. He pressed them, asking if they had anything to say for themselves regarding why they never notified Ling Hui. He let out a low growl, demanding to know what right they had to brand him a traitor and abandon him. We learned that the contact person originally responsible for Ling Hui had already passed away over a decade ago. The original supervisors had all retired, and many of the official files from 10 years prior had been lost in a massive fire. It was a difficult case to investigate, but was that an excuse to stop? Su Weiguo roared in fury, while the voice on the other end of the line urged him to remain calm. A fire surged in Su Weiguo's heart as he snapped back, declaring he didn't care about the consequences anymore. He knew one thing for certain. Ling Hui had never betrayed them, and he had never betrayed his country. Instead, it was his country that had abandoned him. The voice sighed, promising to do their best to investigate. The call ended with a heavy sigh, leaving Su Weiguo to clench his fists in the silence. He slumped back into his seat, feeling as though every ounce of strength had been drained from his body. On the screen, the fallen narcotics officer lay motionless, listening to Ling Hui's heartbreaking words. As he looked at Ling Hui's grief-stricken face, his own expression was filled with guilt and unbearable pity. After a long moment, Ling Hui stumbled to his feet and walked forward to pick up an AK-47 from the ground. He fired 2 shots into the empty dirt, then reached down toward the impact site. He dug the bullets out of the soil while everyone watched the screen in absolute, stunned disbelief. Then, he reached toward the bullet hole in his own abdomen. To be honest, it is a sight hard to stomach. Ling Hui let out a muffled groan, sweat dripping from his pale face as the veins in his neck bulged with effort. His teeth ground together audibly until he finally withdrew his hand, holding a bullet soaked in crimson blood. With a wet thud, the blood-stained bullet fell to the ground. He wasn't finished yet, though. He reached into his thigh and pulled out a second bullet, his breathing coming in ragged, violent gasps. He buried the 2 real bullets in the dirt beneath him, and then took the ones he had just fired. He took the AK bullets he had just dug out of the dirt and began to force them back into his open wounds. The moment they entered, his body jerked upright, his eyes nearly bulging from the sheer agony of the sensation. Ling Hui sucked in a sharp breath, using the nearby body for support as he slowly forced himself to stand. The fallen narcotics officer watched him with a wooden expression, unable to stop himself from asking if it hurt. Ling Hui replied that he was giving him far too much credit. The pain was piercing, as if a knife were being used to stab him and then twist inside. But if he didn't swap the bullets, well, the consequences would be dire. His identity would be at risk of exposure, and this path was one that countless brothers had paved with their lives. He couldn't let that path end with him, not even in death, even as he grimaced in visible, teeth-gritting pain. Yet his voice remained unshakable. Hearing this, the officer's mouth hung open, struggling to find the right words. Finally, he settled into a heavy silence, whispering that they were sorry for the injustice Ling Hui had suffered. As the officer spoke, his eyes were filled with a deep, gnawing guilt. Once, he too had hated Ling Hui. He had truly believed that the deaths of Ding Hui and the others were entirely Ling Hui's fault. He was just one of the many officers across the country who despised him. But in this moment, he realized just how catastrophically wrong he had been. Ling Hui was still the man he had always been. He had never abandoned his country. Even if his country had abandoned him, he was still serving his mission with devotion. He was ready to die for the task his country gave him, so long as the path remained open. He claimed he wasn't owed an apology. He felt no grievance. From the day he became a gray man undercover, he had already accepted this possible end. To him, it was enough to complete the mission and keep the darkness where the people couldn't see it. Ling Hui shook his head slowly just as a shout rang out, ordering a search toward the sound of the gunfire. In the distance, flashlights flickered to life as members of the Kun-sa group began to close in on their position. The Kun-sa group moved rapidly toward Ling Hui's position, while from behind, another figure was also approaching. We see Ling Hui turn his gaze toward Ji Du-hang, who lay on the ground in a pool of his own blood. Blood was gushing from the man's legs and chest, prompting Ling Hui to quickly crouch down by his side. He tried to lift Ji Du-hang up, but the officer held him back, telling his comrade not to waste his strength. He pointed out that they were both wounded and he wouldn't survive the day, causing Ling Hui to growl in denial. He told him not to talk nonsense, insisting the wounds weren't fatal and that there was still hope for him to live. With those words, Ling Hui prepared to drag Ji Du-hang away from the approaching danger toward the rear. Suddenly, Ji Du-hang pulled a triangular bayonet from the body of a fallen Kun-sa soldier nearby. He aimed it at his own throat, his voice cold and calm as he threatened to die right there if he wasn't released. Ling Hui froze, his eyes turning bloodshot with grief as he asked what on earth the man was doing. Ji Duhang urged him to give up, explaining that the pursuers were close and he truly couldn't escape anymore. He feared that staying would only implicate Ling Hui, who insisted he could hide him until the search passed. Ling Hui growled that he could find a way to get him out, acknowledging that the officer was a brave man. Ji Duhang reminded him that this undercover line was paved with countless lives and must not be compromised. He argued that if Ling Hui were exposed, his own life wouldn't be worth 10 deaths. They were both men of duty. He wasn't afraid of sacrifice, only of a sacrifice without value, and he told Ling Hui to aim the gun at him. He demanded that Ling Hui shoot him when the others arrived to secure his cover. It was the only way. As he spoke, Ji Duhang's voice rose to a desperate roar, but Ling Hui could only recoil in horror. He cried out that he simply couldn't do it, retreating 2 steps as tears fell heavily from his eyes. He remembered when he first joined the group and had to kill Wu Yin to pass the test, a memory that haunted him. Today, to earn the absolute trust of those men, he would have to kill Ji Duhang with his own hands. He truly couldn't do it. Though he was a fierce demon when facing his enemies, this was different. His hands were already stained with the blood of countless others, but this was his brother, his fellow soldier. He couldn't bring himself to do it, but Ji Duhang pleaded, telling him he must follow through. With a voice full of desperation, Ji Duhang begged him not to let his sacrifice be in vain. Ling Hui let out a low, agonized growl as his trembling hand slowly raised the gun toward Ji Duhang. The officer revealed his true name was Wu Bing and that he had a sister named Wu Yin. He asked that if Ling Hui ever saw her, he should tell her he didn't disgrace her or their parents. He acknowledged the burden Ling Hui carried, urging him to believe that their country would never forget him. The nation would always remember every good man who sacrificed everything for the greater good. He insisted that one day Ling Hui's name would be cleared and begged him to stay true to his mission. Wu Bing roared with bloodshot eyes, while tears streamed uncontrollably down Ling Hui's face. Ling Hui nodded heavily, unable to find his voice, though he desperately wanted to tell Wu Bing the truth. But the words wouldn't come, and from the distance, the voices of the pursuers grew louder. Flashlights cut through the dark, and someone recognized Ling Hui's silhouette from behind. They called out to him, and the leader of the group, a man built like a bear, narrowed his eyes. This was the third master of Kun Sa, He Huang, who watched as Ling Hui kept his back turned. Ling Hui quietly wiped the tears from his face and placed his finger firmly on the trigger. Yet, he hesitated to pull it, prompting Wu Bing to hiss at him to aim for the chest and fire. Wu Bing growled in frantic urgency, and Ling Hui, closing his eyes in pure agony, slowly applied pressure. And just at that moment, a figure emerged in the distance, catching sight of Ling Hui's gun barrel. Terrified for Wu Bing, the newcomer let out a low roar of fury as he looked up at the scene. When he saw the silhouette standing before Wu Bing, his mind seemed to explode in a mix of panic and disbelief. He was utterly lost in shock. That familiar face belonged to none other than his old classmate, Ling Hui. We remember him as the most brilliant student in their major, a man with light in his eyes whose parents were martyrs. Su Weiguo had no time to wonder why he was here or why he was aiming at one of his own. A shot rang out as Ling Hui pulled the trigger, sending a bullet straight into Wu Bing's chest. Blood began to flow instantly, yet Wu Bing struggled to whisper 2 final words, "Thank you." As his eyes slowly turned gray, his hand remained tightly gripped around the bayonet Ling Hui had used to kill so many. Su Weiguo stood frozen, staring at Wu Bing, before finally snapping back to reality with a cry of agony. Hearing that roar of pain, Ling Hui looked up, and for a brief second, their worlds collided. Their eyes met in a heavy silence. "Weiguo," Ling Hui stammered, just as another shot echoed through the trees. Ling Hui felt a sharp, searing pain in his stomach, causing him to stumble back several steps. He collapsed to the ground, yet he acted as if the wound in his gut didn't even belong to him. His gaze remained fixed on Su Weiguo, feeling a pain in his heart so intense he could barely breathe. He opened his mouth, silently mouthing the words, "Weiguo, I am not a traitor." But across from him, Su Weiguo's eyes were filled with nothing but pure, unadulterated hatred for his former friend. Su Weiguo swore a blood oath that if he didn't kill Ling Hui, he wouldn't deserve to be called a man. With one last look of contempt, he vanished into the forest, leaving Ling Hui to slip into darkness and collapse. Watching this memory unfold, the present-day Su Weiguo turned bright red, his fists trembling with suppressed emotion. "Ling Hui, my brother, I'm so sorry," Su Weiguo sobbed, the weight of his misunderstanding finally crushing him. "I deserve to die for this," he cried out, clutching his head as he collapsed to the ground in agony. For decades, Su Weiguo had made it his life's mission to hunt down and kill Ling Hui, the man he called a traitor. His hatred for Ling Hui ran deeper than anyone else's, fueled by the memory of what he thought he saw with his own eyes. He had watched Wu Bing die at the end of Ling Hui's barrel, convinced his old classmate had betrayed their sacred oath. To see a brother turn his weapon on a fellow soldier was a sin he couldn't forgive. He loathed that Ling Hui had fallen into darkness. That moment when Wu Bing fell had defined his life, but only now did the terrible truth finally come to light. He realized he had been wrong all along. Ling Hui had never betrayed his country or the promises they made together. Ling Hui was still the same man, a hero, in fact, yet Su Weiguo had spent a lifetime treating him like a monster. Imagine the pain Ling Hui felt, forced to pull the trigger on his own comrade to maintain his cover. And then, to be shot by his own best friend? The physical wound was nothing compared to the heartbreak Ling Hui must have endured. To kill a brother in arms, and then be branded a traitor by the one person who should have trusted him. It's almost too much to bear. We can only wonder how much despair Ling Hui felt in that moment. Meanwhile, back in the memory, Lao Lu saw it all happen. He watched as Ling Hui finished off a police officer on the ground, but a split second later, a gunshot echoed through the air. Ling Hui collapsed instantly, prompting He Huang to let out a furious roar as he rushed forward to prop him up. Third Master, Lao Lu's been hit. He's been shot several times, one man shouted, only for He Huang to bark back. Shut up, I'm not blind. He ordered his men to hunt down the shooter and bring back his head, while the rest helped him carry Lao Lu away. With a grunt of exertion, He Huang hoisted the unconscious Ling Hui onto his back, his face a mask of grim determination. They retreated quickly toward Kuan Sa's villa, and as they moved, more and more men joined the frantic procession. They watched as He Huang carried the limp body of Ling Hui toward the rear of the compound. And so, we come to the following day. Inside Kuan Sa's villa, we see Ling Hui lying on a hospital bed, his eyes tightly shut and his face as pale as a sheet. His lips are parched and dry as several doctors in white coats work frantically to save his life. With a metallic click, the lead doctor extracts the final bullet and places it into a clean, white tray. Kuan Sa glances briefly at the bloody bullet in the tray before turning his gaze back toward the unconscious Ling Hui. Half an hour later, the lead doctor finishes suturing Ling Hui's wounds with practiced precision. After cleaning the injuries and applying medicine, he wraps them in gauze, finally finishing the grueling procedure. The doctor lets out a heavy sigh of relief, prompting Kuan Sa to ask the question on everyone's mind. How is he? The doctor explains that because He Huang brought him back so quickly, Lao Lu's life has been spared. Hearing this, He Huang and the others finally breathe a sigh of relief before stepping out of the room. Lao Shu, however, casts a disappointed look at Ling Hui, a murderous glint in his eyes as he thinks how lucky the man is. As they return to the hall and take their seats, the sound of footsteps announces Kuan Bu's arrival with a report. He reveals that over 30 brothers were killed last night, and the man Lao Lu took down was no ordinary target. He was likely an elite anti-drug officer, responsible for killing more than half of their men using only a triangular spike. It was only because Lao Lu arrived in time and managed to kill him that the slaughter finally ended. Kuan Bu is certain of his findings, and as he speaks, a flash of murderous intent crosses Kuan Sa's eyes. He curses the dead officer for killing so many of his men, lamenting that Lao Lu killed him before he could be tortured. He would have made the man beg for death, but as Kuan Bu points out, they truly owe this victory to Lao Lu. If Lao Lu hadn't stepped up when he did, it's likely that many more of their brothers would have perished. He Huang chimes in to agree, and Kuan Sa nods, acknowledging that Lao Lu has indeed performed a great service. It seems Lao Lu is truly one of them now, and Kuan Sa warns Lao Shu to stop being so suspicious in the future. Kuan Sa turns his gaze toward Lao Shu, reflecting on how the Kuan Sa group had actually received advance warning about the police operation. Because they knew what was coming, they had prepared an ambush involving every high-ranking member of the organization. However, because Lao Shu had been playing the role of a watchdog, they decided to keep Ling Hui in the dark just to be safe. Lao Shu nods quickly in agreement, though he wonders aloud if Lao Lu will feel resentful since they didn't notify him about the plan. He Huang suddenly speaks up, causing Kuan Sa to pause for a moment as he considers the implications. He admits that their actions weren't exactly honorable, but justifies it as a necessary step to wipe out those persistent officers. He decides that once Lao Lu recovers, they will grant him more power and control over the group's channels. This will serve as his compensation, a decision that He Huang and the others accept with a respectful nod. Only Lao Shu keeps his head lowered, his face twisted in a mask of pure jealousy. Meanwhile, a figure emerges from the edge of the forest. With his clothes torn to rags, he looks like a wild man as he stands at the tree line and casts one final look back. He can't help but burst into tears. When they first arrived, every one of them was filled with high spirits and a sense of duty. Their goal was to wipe out the evil Kuan Sa group once and for all, but they had no idea they were walking into yet another trap. Out of nearly 100 men, only a handful managed to escape, leaving the rest of the great Xia wolves behind. They now lie forever on that cold, unforgiving earth. He whispers to his fallen brothers, promising that one day he will return. Su Weiguo grinds his teeth through his tears, swearing vengeance. And then there is Ling Hui, the man he now considers a traitor. He brands him a disgrace and vows to kill him with his own hands to atone for the lives of his fallen comrades. Su Weiguo takes one last, lingering look at the place where so many brave men sacrificed everything. He turns and leaves without looking back. When the news of the failed ambush reaches Great Xia, the entire police force is shaken. They never expected an operation that was supposed to be foolproof to end in such a disaster. It was a heavy blow, to say the least. And when Su Weigwa finally returns with his report, the truth of what happened begins to surface. After the news broke that one of Ouyang Cheng's undercover agents was seen shooting a narcotics officer, the public's emotions reached a boiling point, with many claiming they knew those agents were trouble all along. They argued that the betrayal was obvious, especially since the last batch of intelligence had already led to a massacre. Over 100 of Great Xia's finest were lost, yet officials had insisted there was no proof of treason until now. Now that witnesses have seen him shooting his own comrades, the question remains, who could possibly still defend him? It seems highly likely that the entire ambush was orchestrated using information leaked directly from his side. His heart has turned black, they say, and many believe it is time for a complete purge of his unit. They refuse to let such a disgrace remain free, turning their collective fury toward Ouyang Cheng for an explanation. Inside the police headquarters, we see high-ranking officials roaring in anger as they confront a stunned Ouyang Cheng. Ouyang Cheng looks on in utter disbelief, his eyes vacant as he whispers that such a thing simply isn't possible. He insists it couldn't have been him, as that specific agent wasn't even the one who delivered the intel this time. He maintains that his man would never betray the motherland, shaking his head in a desperate attempt to deny the reality. But the critics aren't listening, suggesting that the entire undercover program has rotted to its very core. One official begins to vent his rage, but Ouyang Cheng isn't about to let him finish that thought. Ouyang Cheng cuts him off abruptly, looking as fierce and dangerous as a cornered beast in his defense. He argues that men who aren't afraid of death would never betray their country after everything they've sacrificed. To be honest, the suffering they endure while walking on the edge of a knife is more than most could bear. Every step they take is marked by blood, with sacrifices being made every single day in the shadows. Facing ruthless criminals, they never retreat, even though they spend every waking moment dancing on the tip of a blade. Their lives are more harrowing than we can imagine, and yet, the accusation remains. They have finally turned. He admired those who stepped onto that path, but the darkness held more than just shadows, it held temptation. Humans are creatures of desire, after all, and sometimes that innate hunger makes it impossible to resist. And here we learn that betrayal is seen as a natural consequence. After all, Su Weigwa saw it himself. One of his men shot a narcotics officer outside. That much is an undeniable fact. What you see isn't necessarily the truth, Ouyang Cheng roars, for only he truly understands the reality. He alone knows what these gray men face, remembering the words Lin Hui and his team spoke on their final day. They had told him that if they ever stood on opposite sides, he shouldn't hesitate to aim his weapon at them. They asked him to pull the trigger, to let the bullets pierce their chests and use their blood and bones, to pave the way forward, because they knew that the moment he aimed his gun at them, he would be the one more deserving of life. Facing Ouyang Cheng's roar, the high-ranking official scoffs coldly. He claims death doesn't matter, but Ouyang Cheng knows facts speak louder than words, yet he isn't allowed to finish. Ouyang Cheng cuts him off, pointing out how they constantly blame their intelligence for every failure. They keep shifting the responsibility onto his gray men, but they never stop to consider if a ghost might be standing right beside them. He knows his men, every single one of them, is a hero. They wouldn't even blink at the face of death for their country, but he wonders about the men standing before him. They sit in high positions with power in their hands, but would they truly face death for the motherland? Could you pay any price for your country? Ouyang Cheng asks, but the official insists it's impossible for their ranks to be tainted. He claims they are all tested comrades, and that no such black sheep could exist among them. But now the evidence is ironclad against the gray men, and as for Ouyang Cheng himself, they believe he has simply become too blinded by his own emotions and gratitude. The official declares he will take the matter to the organization for a vote, seeking someone more impartial to manage the gray men. He waves Ouyang Cheng away with a dismissive gesture, his face twisted in a mask of pure impatience. Ouyang Cheng lets out a tragic, hollow laugh before turning to leave, looking like a man who has lost his very soul. Deep down, he is certain his gray men are innocent. The ghost must be hiding among the high-ranking officials instead. With only 3 months before the vote to replace him, he vows to use every second to drag the traitor into the light. He must clear their names. Meanwhile, in Kunsa, a delirious Lin Hui mutters that he isn't a traitor to Weigwa. It seems he is trapped in a nightmare, his face contorted in pain as he sees Su Weigwa raising a gun toward him. The scene repeats in a cruel loop. Though he cannot hear the words, the weight of the moment is deafening. He can clearly see the disappointment and hatred in Weigwa's eyes, and he desperately cries out that he hasn't betrayed anyone. Lin Hui suddenly bolts upright, drenched in a cold sweat, as the words "Sixth Master" echo in the room. Beside his bed, a woman in a white nurse's uniform watches him, her eyes widening as she realizes he is finally awake. She calls out in surprise, being the caregiver Kunsa personally assigned to look after Lin Hui's recovery. Looking at his surroundings, he realizes it was all just a dream, though he wonders if he spoke his secrets aloud. A sharp, dangerous glint flashes in Lin Hui's eyes as he tests her, asking for her name in the Daxia language. The nurse pauses, her large eyes filled with genuine confusion, before responding in the local Wa language. She explains she doesn't understand Daxia and asks if he can speak her tongue, but Lin Hui simply repeats the question. His body coils with the tension of a hunting leopard, ready to strike the nurse down if she shows any sign of deception. She apologizes again, insisting she doesn't understand, and suggests she should go notify the boss of his recovery. Lin Hui stares deep into her eyes, searching for a flicker of a lie, but finds only a disarming, simple purity. Finally, his body begins to relax back into the bed, and he gives a small nod in her language, telling her to go. The nurse quickly gets to her feet and hurries outside, and a moment later, the sound of approaching footsteps echoes through the hall. Kunsa, Kunbu, He Huang, Old Mouse, and Kai Shu all come crowding into the room, finding Lin Hui with his eyes finally open. We see smiles break out across every face in the group as they call out to him, relieved that their sixth master has returned. They tell him he's been unconscious for 2 full days and how worried they've been, though, to be honest, they are mostly just grateful. They insist that if he hadn't taken down that elite Daxia undercover agent, many more of their brothers would have surely perished. He Huang and Kai Shu look at Lin Hui with genuine admiration, declaring him the true hero of this entire operation. Their expressions are filled with a strange, yellow-tinged intensity as they crowd around his bed, their faces glowing with a mix of relief and greed. One after another, those weathered, sallow faces lean in close, celebrating the man they believe is their most loyal and deadly asset.